All right, welcome to Cinema Pod. This is the fourth episode. I am your host, as always, Benjamin Weingard, assistant professor at Hillsdale College, and the co-host is
The
Bo Weingard.
co-pilot Weingard, Bo,
Yes,
still broadcasting from an undisclosed location in the Midwest of the United States.
yes, reported to be in the Midwest, and today we are going to discuss the epic 1987 ultra-violent sci-fi film RoboCop.
Cyberpunk classic.
Yes, directed by Paul Verhoeven, the Dutch auteur. So, getting into this, as I noted, it is directed by Verhoeven, who has a reputation for being something of a voluble and perhaps passionate and difficult to deal with director.
I think you mean volatile.
No, he's voluble as well.
Oh, he's talkative.
Yes,
He is talkative.
Yeah, he's known for. I think reporters and film critics enjoy him because he's very loquacious.
Yeah,
and
I can see why.
Yeah, he seems. Unlike other auteur directors, such as maybe David Lynch, Verhoeven doesn't try to hide his view of his own films, right? So he's kind of open about what he was attempting to do.
Yes.
Also a fairly jocular guy. And as we'll get into, I think for me, that kind of holds the key to understanding RoboCop. But
yes,
we'll just know he directed so he has this career in the Netherlands that.
Well, before getting into the director, shouldn't we do a quick what is RoboCop?
Oh yeah, you want and of course you want to do your gratuitous
very quick. It's not gratuitous, it sets it up for the audience. So RoboCop, set in an unspecified time in the future, at least from 87. RoboCop is a cyberpunk film about the police officer Alex Murphy, who is transferred into a crime-ridden district in a dystopian Detroit. In his first action with his new partner, Lewis, he pursues Clarence Boddicker's gang into their hideout, which is an abandoned steel mill. They decide to go in without backup, which we might talk about. Murphy is eventually cornered and brutally murdered, but the dead do not stay dead in the world of RoboCop, as Murphy is resurrected by the corporation Omni Consumer Products, or OCP, as part of a program to create a robot police officer after the failure of their first model, Ed 209. At first, RoboCop is a success, but some of Murphy's memories come back and he eventually discovers his killers. He pursues them, his pursuit of them leads to the second in command at OCP, a cutthroat executive named Dick Jones. And we'll go over what happens there. RoboCop is most immediately, I would say, a biting social satire, which mocks American consumer culture, privatization, and, of course, the news. However, it's also an existential meditation on the nature of humanity, and even a Jesus allegory with Murphy as the crucified and resurrected savior of Detroit.
Yes.
We'll also talk about that. Before getting to Verhoeven, then, I think what we need to say is like, okay, this was a script. Verhoeven comes on later is the point. So this is a script, right, by Ed Neumer and Michael Miner, right?
Yes, that's right.
It's interesting how it came together because Neumer and Miner both were working on this idea independently.
Yes.
Neumer's idea was about a robot cop, And I think it was Miners who was about the cyborg. Is that correct?
That's right.
Right. So one idea was like you'd have this sort of robot cop, whatever. And then I think that one probably, my read on this, and I couldn't find more information on this, but my read was Neumer's sensibility was the more social satire. So
Yes.
his was this RoboCop with this social satire. Miners was more about the human put into the robot, and maybe some of the conflict there, the cyborg, what is human, etc. Both were clearly influenced by two movies, Metropolis by Fritz Lang, obviously, and most importantly and most directly, Blade Runner by Ridley Scott from what is that, 82 or something?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So
Also interesting that Michael Miner is a self-confessed Luddite and technophobe and has very unfavorable views of capitalism.
well, there's a lot of criticism of capitalism to
Yes.
go around here.
And
Yeah.
then Neumer also, you can see his sensibility as well in Starship Troopers, the film directed by, that's also a kind of sardonic social satire directed by Verhoeven that Neumer worked on. And just also as a kind of tangential note, they're actually in the process of writing a new RoboCop that's supposed to be the direct follow-up to the original classic called RoboCop Returns.
So they would ignore all of the
ignore
sequels.
all of the sequels, return to the original sensibility, and currently they have Abe Forsyth is the director attached with the film, and he's not very well known. He's an Australian filmmaker who did a film called Little Monsters in 2019. It was critically lauded, and it's kind of a genre mashup of the zombie film. Right. So perhaps he was pulled because of his deft ability to kind of play around with genres similar to Verhoeven.
You know, I wonder, well, we could think about that later. I was thinking that like Edgar Wright would be a great director. I actually think you could get Edgar Wright, and he kind of has the sensibility that you would need. He did like Shaun of the Dead, etc. But anyway, we can get into that.
Yeah. Interestingly, the director who did District 9 was attached to the project for a while.
What is that guy's
name? Or
Blommenpack or whatever.
Yeah.
Camp.
Yeah.
He made District 9, which was, you know, I thought it was a bit overrated, but it was a decent film, and then made a bunch of duds.
Yeah, like Chappie.
Yeah.
It just, yeah. So for whatever
they
reason,
have this script. They end up working together because Miner was like, hey, I'm working on something kind of similar. So they end up putting this idea together, pitching it. To their surprise, I think they were like, okay, let's go through with it. Then they were trying to get a director. So you have this script with the rather clunky and sort of childish title, RoboCop.
Yes.
And you're trying to get a director. So they're trying to get a serious director to do this, and they're having all kinds of problems as director after director is like, no, I don't want to do a project called RoboCop. And in fact, Neumer talks about how they would keep saying we should change the title, make it something more serious or whatever, but they just could never find anything, and RoboCop stuck to it. Verhoeven, who's this, as you said, a Dutch auteur who had made, I haven't seen any of those films, but like sort of sleazy, like that's his aesthetic, is this kind of sleazy noir aesthetic. He had made a couple of films and then run afoul of the new left-wing government.
That's
actually.
Right. Yes.
in Holland. So he had come to the United States And he got the script originally, thought this is fucking garbage, RoboCop, who gives a shit, you know, so threw it in the trash or whatever, as he says. And then apparently his wife read the script and recognized that there was maybe more to it than Verhoeven had originally thought. And Verhoeven says in one of the documentary interviews with him, he says, you know, maybe it's not fucking Shakespeare, but there's something here. So he agrees to do it.
Yes. And just to dig a little bit into Verhoeven. So as we noted, he did some of these kind of Dutch auteur films. They're not very well known in the United States. He did a film in the US before RoboCop called Flesh and Blood that was mostly a failure, 1985. Then RoboCop, and then in 1990, he does Total Recall. 92, he does Basic Instinct. 95, he does Showgirls, the infamous Showgirls that won, I think, like 5 or 6 Razzies.
Yes, it got
award for.
Yes.
Clearly, viewers did not appreciate the sensibility of Verhoeven and Showgirls. I haven't seen it recently, so I can't really comment on whether it works or not. And then 1997, Starship Troopers. He's known for graphic violence, sexual content, kind of pulpy material, but also his kind of biting social satire, genre blending, kind of tongue in cheek. He's been compared to, in terms of his sensibility, Bong Joon-ho, the Korean auteur director.
I mean, I think the big difference, and this is maybe my one criticism of Verhoeven, or the one place where where he doesn't thrill me, is his aesthetic sense, his visual sense is nowhere near as accomplished as Bong Joon's.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right. But to note the Showgirls, which I think Basic Instinct does too, but for whatever reason, at least some critics seem to get what he was doing with Basic Instinct. Showgirls went one step further with this very sleazy, sexually provocative, but clearly ironic film. But it's an irony that is bizarre, and sometimes you can't tell if he's taking what he's doing seriously or not. And there are some people who maintain that he hired Elizabeth Berkley, who was the actress who played Jessie in Saved by the Bell. He hired her specifically because she wasn't a good actress, and he wanted somebody who would kind of give this overwrought, hammy performance. Now, there are other people who say, no, she did exactly, she actually did well in it. She did exactly what you should do in it. There's a lot of reassessment of Showgirls. So I've only seen it. I rewatched about 30 minutes of it. And it is hard to know what to do with it because the tone is so peculiar. But that's Verhoeven. He's got this sometimes the satire is a bit too in your face. Sometimes it's hard to know if he's being satirical.
Right.
But he's clearly a gifted filmmaker.
Yeah. So, yeah, tonally, he's known for as we said, like these satires where, again, it's kind of hard to know exactly who the joke's on. But also, and I think this is extremely important for RoboCop, he has a very sleek style, and his edits are such that he creates a powerful narrative momentum. And in his best films, there are very few excess scenes or excess dialogue. It's very propulsive.
Yeah, that's actually what surprised me the most rewatching RoboCop, is just how watchable it is, and how compelling and how forward moving it is.
I completely agree with that. Interestingly, and you mentioned this, he is known for bad acting, that is getting bad performances from actors and actresses, and over the top melodrama. Now, some critics as you noted, maintain that this is deliberate and reflexive, like he's purposely creating space between reality and the medium of film.
Right.
Others say he's just not that great at directing.
I mean, I think you can see he does, because he picks, I forget who the guy is, but Denise Richards is one of the actresses in Starship.
Right.
And so it's as if he's choosing these actors and actresses in some of these films quite purposefully because they're bad.
Yes.
And because there's this kind of, would you even call it Dadaism about him, where he's kind of making these bad performances? It's like purposeful, almost anti-art.
Yes, I think that's
I think that I mean, he's clearly like a very bright guy,
right? I have a tough time believing that this extremely intelligent, socially daft, you can tell from his interviews, he's with it socially, he's not like on the spectrum, that he doesn't understand that these performances are very unrealistic, right? And over the top.
Right.
He also has said that, quote, "I don't make political statements. I reflect what's happening in society." We'll see if that's in fact true or not, but that's his own claim.
Right.
So also interesting, RoboCop was reviewed, I would say, contemporaneously rather positively.
Yes.
And again, I'm just, because it's running with a theme, I will pick a couple of reviewers to give you a flavor of what the reviews were like at the time. And I will start with the great Pauline Kael, who I think botches this film.
She has like an impressive run of botching films on here.
Yeah, so Kael was not at all impressed with the film. She says, "In this punk sci-fi revenge fantasy, the near future is played for depravity, for kicks." Then she notes she notes that the movie is shot in deliberate, sick, sleazo comic book style of RoboCop, part man, part tank. This virtuous knight in heavy metal clumps through the city. The picture keeps telling you that its leering brutishness is a terrific turn on, and maybe it is if you're hooked on Wagnerian sci-fi comic books. This isn't gallows humor, it's gallows pulp.
Dude, I think the pretentious would say Wagnerian.
Yeah, they would, but I was deliberately.
I'm assuming that that's a reference to Richard Wagner's opera.
Yes, it is indeed.
And it is interesting because the score is very brassy, right? There is this kind of
the RoboCop march.
Yeah, but that is man, that is, I didn't find that review, but that is an atrocious review, I have to say.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about, and I won't read the full review here or this full clip that I have, but the review from Pauline Kael is similar to David Kerr's Chicago Tribune review, where he understood that there was some social satire and it was interesting, but he thought that the action was so over the top that it was actually undermining of the satire. So he says that the, quote, "comic strategy consists of following a wild display of violence with a stroke of understated sarcasm. When one character gets an arm blown off, another is sure to answer, quote, 'Give the man a hand,' unquote." Mm-hmm. Now, that is in fact accurate. It does have that kind of comic strategy, but I don't think it undermines the effectiveness of the film.
I mean, I think that's the entire point of the film. So
yes,
it's yeah.
And I won't read from Ebert's review, but we will note that both Siskel and Ebert were highly praiseworthy of the film.
Siskel
and thought
liked
it was a good time.
Yeah, Siskel liked it more than Ebert, which is interesting because Siskel is usually pretty squeamish about violence. So both of them thought that the violence played more for humor, and that it wasn't, because one thing you note about Siskel is one of his complaints is often that he felt depressed during a film. So he clearly has this like I just don't want to sit there and watch this stuff that makes me feel depressed. Whereas RoboCop did not have that effect on him, and it didn't have that effect on me, which I thought it would a bit, because I remember the last time I watched it, I kind of thought it was a little, I don't know, dark and dreary and kind of just like anxiety producing and unpleasant, but it's really not.
Yeah, I agree. I was a little bit concerned about that as well. Just, yeah, recognize that it's great art, but I probably don't want to go on the ride with it. And
Right.
instead, it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Right. And I would actually say the thing with the Ebert review, and you know, we can use this to launch into an overview of the film, but I think even Ebert and Siskel just missed some of the profundities of the film, or maybe were more focused on the surface stuff and didn't draw out some of the more interesting themes.
Yeah, that's perhaps fair, although I'll just read this snippet from Ebert. So Ebert does say there's comedy in this movie, even slapstick comedy. There is romance. There's a certain amount of philosophy centering on the question, what is a man? And there is pointed social satire too, as the RoboCop takes on some of the attributes and some of the popular following of a Bernie Goetz. And Bernie Goetz was a infamous or famous, however you want to view him, vigilante figure in New York in the early 80s.
Yeah, that's fair. Ebert missed the Jesus allegory.
Yeah, he did not draw attention to that.
Also, the one of the things that surprised me getting into the actual movie, because it starts with this, is I guess I had forgot how much of, like, there's these very funny news clips, right? That sort of, I think they appear like maybe 3 or 4 times. It will start as if you're watching a television. And it's actually a very good way of creating this world quickly and efficiently, and adding satire very quickly, right? So we start with this news broadcast, and it says, you give us 3 minutes, we'll give you the world. And one thing that's interesting about that, right, is, and this is, I mean, this was in 87. It's only more so true today. One of the things Verhoeven said he was sort of flummoxed by is how American news would just, it was like 22 minutes and it would just give you story after story with no analysis of what was actually happening. And it would cut from 15 people were brutally murdered to the next thing would be a story about a squirrel running around in the park or something, right? With no context or analysis. And that's exactly what we get from this news station, right?
Right, because it and also one of the anchors is played by Lisa Gibbons, which I find amusing.
Yes.
Yeah, so the opening newscast, it begins with a story about basically the equivalent of Reagan's Star Wars program.
No, actually, it starts with the equivalent of apartheid South Africa.
Oh, yeah, and there's a city where they're building a neutron bomb.
Yeah,
that
they
was
got
by the French or something.
Right. So the government, the white-led government, was under assault from the South Africans. That you get the sense that the actual native people, and the government got a neutron bomb, and that allowed it to preserve its power. So you immediately get the sense that we're in this dark world in the future sometime, and we're satirizing, the way that governments work with power. But also we get this like story of horrendous injustice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we go right from there to the Star Wars, what would be the equivalent of Star Wars.
Yeah, that is the Reagan anti-missile defense program.
Right.
And then we also, the news stories actually set up the kind of themes of some of the themes of the film. We get this story about police union leaders blaming Omni Consumer Products, that is OCP,
right,
for
this corporation.
Yeah, this corporation that has entered a contract with the city to fund and run the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department. Now, It's just interesting. Why is OCP running the police department? What do they gain from that? And I think the answer is nothing. They're just using the police department as some kind of experiment for their products.
Well, they're trying completely to privatize it eventually, right? And
Yeah,
in
for
fact,
what purpose we don't know though. Like,
to
how are
make
they going
money,
to? Right? How are they going to make money from the police department?
charge people for having the police, right? I mean, because remember, Dick Jones later basically he gives his speech and he says, our business, what we've done is we've gone into these areas traditionally conceived as nonprofit, and
Right.
we've made money from them. I say good business is wherever business is or whatever.
Right, but one of the things that they use the police department for is basically running these experiments with their
Yes,
products that they
right.
can then sell
To the military.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it clearly there's it's not a benevolent move on the part of OCP. Also, interestingly, OCP, Omni Consumer Products. I mean, that's a great name for a company, but they seem to be anything but the manufacturer of consumer products.
I think was it CinemaSins who pointed out they do everything other than make consumer products.
Yes, there's no evidence that they're concerned at all with consumer products.
Now, clearly, this illustrates this. It's such a movie of the Reagan era, right? And here it's of course satirizing privatization. This concern that everything is going to be controlled by some private company, even these traditionally nonprofit companies, like the military, hospitals, I think they said, etc. And so here it's the police.
Right, and we'll see shortly that OCP wants to go further and actually build a private utopian city.
Yes,
where old Detroit was.
Right. And we're also introduced to the villain of the film. Well, one of the villains, right?
Yes.
Clarence Boddicker. And I think they say he's wanted for 31 police officers.
Yeah, so they just kind of mention, right? It's not even like this huge deal. Mention that Boddicker saw in connection with the deaths of 31 police officers.
Right. Yeah. So that's an impressive record. And we should say this Detroit that we're in so we get this news broadcast and then we start in the district, wherever this is, where Alex Murphy, we're introduced to him, where he is transferred. And we get the idea that this is a very high crime district. Immediately we realize this. And in fact, the news broadcast, it does a really good job. The script works well here because it tells us about this cop who got injured and might, he's in the hospital, he might die. We find out that he does die. So that's what ties us into this police department that we begin in, or as the guy says, welcome to hell.
Yeah, so Alex Murphy is transferring in to Metro West from Metro South.
Yes.
And the sergeant tells him, we work here. Get your armor and suit up, motherfucker.
Right. Get ready. And oh, by the way, here's your partner, right? And the partner, of course, is Ann Lewis, who's played by, I forget her name. Do you have her name?
No, I don't. But she was actually most well known for playing kind of evil teenage girls.
Yeah, she was in Carrie. Nancy Allen, that's her name.
Yeah.
So Nancy Allen, who had these long, remarkable curls, actually had to cut them. Verhoeven said, "Get rid of those." So she plays when we're introduced to her, she's beating the shit out of some suspect that's in a fight with her and this other guy, and she's the one who ends up winning the fight. I think there's this weird sexual politics that plays throughout some of Verhoeven's movies, and this one has the same, where it's very androgynous and it's very, you could call it feminist, in that the women is a totally integrated police department in that they even shower together, the men and the women, and there's no indication that they care about it or look at each other sexually. And I like it that there's never any suggestion that Murphy and Lewis have any sexual tension, or that would be something that would matter here. There, they have toward the end, we get the sense that they have a fond relationship, but that's it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And Sergeant Reed,
she blows bubbles with her gum too. That's a personality.
That's her signature move.
Yes.
Sergeant Reed, appears to be the head of Metro West, is this, kind of stereotypical black martinet cop that came in
the 80s.
Yeah, 70s and 80s. And early on in these scenes, one of the officers says, we should strike, fuck OCP.
Right.
Sergeant Reed comes in and says the funeral's tomorrow. So we find out that this police officer that had been reported about on the news has in fact died.
Right.
And Reed is pissed off. He says department requests all officers not on duty to attend. So everybody who's on duty stays on duty. Any donations for the family may be given to Cecil as usual. So we see that this is a common pattern here with this particular unit. I don't want to hear any more talk about strikes. We're not plumbers, we're police officers, and police officers don't strike. God damn it.
Right.
So Sergeant Reed, again, playing up this kind of a little bit of a machismo, and the police officers are unique. They don't have the right to strike.
Well, and then there's some sort of I think exploration of what would it mean if the police department were privatized, because then it would just be a traditional labor versus capital conflict. Police officers might strike to get more, etc. So kind of exploring that dynamic.
And also throughout the film, they do a good job of distinguishing between the impoverishment of the public sector as represented by the dilapidated nature of this police department.
Yes.
And the wealth of OCP, as we see in the bathroom of the OCP building and the boardroom of the OCP building, which is lush and has all of the latest technology.
Yes, indeed.
And so we go from this police department then to OCP's boardroom.
Right. So we know who our hero is. Our hero is Alex Murphy. We get him. He's welcome to hell, which actually is an interesting line given the Jesus allegory, right? So he's put in hell now. And then so we have that, and then we move to this OCP board meeting.
Yeah, and in the board meeting, we're introduced to a few other characters who are important. So we're introduced to Dick Jones. Yes. As the big evil corporate titan. We're also
cutthroat titan. Yeah, Dick Jones, played by Ronnie Cox.
Yep. And then we're introduced to Bob Morton, who is the quintessential 80s yuppie who's attempting to ascend the corporate hierarchy.
Love Bob Morton, played by Miguel Ferrier.
And then the obligatory Black corporate board member Johnson, who is basically just a cheerleader.
No, I actually, so one thing I got out of this time watching it, and I rewatched a lot of these scenes, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. If you watch Johnson, he's fucking hilarious.
Oh, he is. Yes, he's especially at the end.
When he gives the thumbs up.
Yes, yeah.
But if you watch his reaction in any of these, it's kind of hilarious, and you don't know what his motivation, like what he cares about, because he seems like kind of the decent guy here. Like,
but I think there's more satire to the Johnson character in that if you observe him throughout the film, he's basically there for exposition, right? He just asks other characters questions.
Yeah.
Right, that
He
gets them
almost
to
plays like our role. He's almost like the audience's role throughout the film. And if you look at his reactions, they're almost what we're thinking.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
He doesn't have his own like personality
No,
or desires or
no,
anything.
he does not. So
So
yeah.
at this board meeting, what you can see immediately is that Bob Morton does not like Dick Jones.
Yeah,
Right.
so Bob Morton just coke snorting, as we find out, um,
Yes.
and very ambitious, kind of ruthless young person trying to climb this ladder. Dick Jones, we're told, is this absolute assassin, and you don't want to fuck with him, right? And
Yes.
then this is all head by this very Reagan-esque old man who's like just referred to as the old man.
Yeah, he doesn't. The
Geezer.
CEO of OCP doesn't have a name. He's just the old man, and he's a very stereotypical 1980s CEO type figure.
Right, but he's kind of you sense that he's kind of this genial old guy, but he just doesn't really know what's going on. And I think he really
Yeah.
is kind of a satire of Reagan, because at this point the idea about Reagan was, yeah, he's this sort of, friendly face actor, but he has no idea what's actually going on in the government. So we have that character, and I forgot how quickly this movie gets into this, because this is this meeting where we find out that Dick Jones has this program for the Ed 209.
Mhm.
This is the robot police officer that he wants to introduce, because police officers, I mean, it really goes back all the way maybe to modern times, right? This satire about replacing humans with machines, because humans want things, they need to sleep. We're going to replace them with robots. We've got this robot and it's Ed 209, right?
Yeah, before the Ed 209 is revealed, the old man gives this platitude-filled corporate boardroom speech, and
Oh yes,
every
that's
time
right.
he speaks a sentence, everybody claps obsequiously.
Yes, I put room is filled with ass kissers, and
Yeah, so
is
but
Bob Art Morton.
the lines he gives are important because they do set up themes throughout the film. So he says, "My friends, I've had this dream for more than a decade now, a dream which I've invited you all to share with me." And then everybody's like, "Oh my God, brilliant."
Yes.
In 6 months, we begin construction of Delta City, where old Detroit now stands. Old Detroit has a cancer. The cancer is crime, and it must be cut out before we employ the 2 million workers that will revive the city. And then he
Right.
notes some more social commentary. Shifts in the tax structure have created an economy ideal for corporate growth. But community
Right.
services, in this case, law enforcement, have suffered. I think it's time we gave something back.
Right. So this is like the idea of the corporate executive who thinks corporations need to like help, they need to step in and help the world, right?
Yes,
And
he's repudiating, at least verbally, Milton Friedman's philosophy of the
right,
corporation.
and we get the sense that he means it, right? For the way he plays this and the way his character throughout, he does seem as though he's actually this relatively affable, genial.
But again, does he mean it? He's seems perfectly content with the psychopath Dick Jones as his number two.
Well, but again, I think that's because he doesn't really understand who Dick Jones is. So
Right,
we can
maybe.
have that debate. So, but yeah, so right after this, Dick Jones gives his talk before he introduces Ed 209, and he gives more of this. We see what OCP is, right? And he says they've gone into these domains that are typically nonprofit. And then he says, good business is where you find it. Now,
Yeah,
this is important, by the way, because Boddicker says this exact line later on,
yeah.
connecting the two of them and their attitudes about business. So Ed 209 comes in. Ed 209 is this sinister looking huge robot with Gatling guns for arms, and
That seems to snarl and growl like an
snarl it.
animal.
I love the sound effects for Ed 209, right? So yes, it makes these animal sounds, and it um it's done by stop motion. We won't get too much into that. Some of that looks pretty absurd. And actually,
Yeah.
another thing about RoboCop is that so the violence looks really good in the film, but some of the other special effects are pretty atrocious. But Ed 209 comes in. It was I believe they said they were influenced by these machines in Japanese comic books.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So
Also important that Dick Jones, when he's introducing the Ed 209, he says, well, we'll use it for urban pacification, but that's just the
yes,
beginning. We can
right,
expect it to become the hot military product for the next decade. So this
right,
gets into these themes of the militarization of the police, which are
right.
extremely prescient and apposite.
Yes, agreed. And so Ed 209 comes in, and there's this sort of innocent looking waspy guy,
Kenny.
Kinney,
Yep.
and he says, you know, he Dick Jones grabs a gun that's in the room for some reason. We never really find out why there's just a handgun with bullets in this room,
Right.
but there is, and he grabs it, he gives it to Kinney, and he says, use it in a threatening manner. And then this is just like an example of like subtle but funny stuff that just runs throughout the film. So Kenny points it at Dick Jones, and
Yeah.
Jones kind of gives him this look, and he's like, point it at Ed 209, you idiot.
Right.
So he points it at Ed 209. Ed 209 wakes up, if you will, and then talks in this very minatory voice and says, you know, you have 20 seconds to please put down the weapon. You have 20 seconds to put down the weapon. And then Dick Jones again gives this look like, I think you better do what Ed says or whatever.
Yes.
So Kinney puts down his weapon, and then Ed looks at it and then kind of looks back at Kinney and says, you now have 15 seconds to put down your weapon. So they start to realize Ed doesn't know what's going on and thinks that he still has the weapon.
That's right. And then everybody kind of starts running around. They're a bit nervous.
Right.
Kenny's trying
Right.
to get out of the way. And then as the Ed 209 counts down to one, somebody from the corporate board shoves Kenny right in front, right in front of the Ed
Right.
209, which proceeds. So not only do they have this silver-plated handgun that's loaded, the Ed 209 during its first demonstration, it's fully loaded.
Yeah, it's fully ready to rock, and it
So it starts
fucking unloads on
pumping him full of dozens, maybe over 50 shots.
probably over 100. I mean, it fucking unloads, and I mean, this is where the ultra violence is important, and humor is, and the importance between the director's cut and the R cut that they had to release originally, the theatrical cut.
Right. So Kenny starts to get annihilated, and then he flies back on this table where there's a model of Delta City.
Right.
And then he gets shot about another 50 times or so.
Right. And
so just in this opening scene, right, there have been more squibs used than all of Die Hard.
Yes, these blood squibs that just pop open, and in fact, so there are two shots in the extended or the director's cut. There are two shots of Kinney getting blown to bits while he's on this like model table. If you watch the theatrical cut, you don't see that. And it is actually hilarious. I mean, it's ultra violent, but it's hilarious because it's just so excessive. And in fact, what Verhoeven said was they turned my sort of macabre humor into this actual grisly film by cutting it so that it took away the excesses of the violence, and it actually made it in some sense more realistic and therefore more disturbing.
Less prima facie absurd, which was the tone that Verhoeven was going for.
Right, and you can
also like the metaphor of Kinney bleeding out and getting annihilated on top of the model of Delta City.
Right, and the humor here relies on this absurd, over-the-top violence because after Kenny's been absolutely obliterated, no chance that he's alive, you hear somebody say, will somebody call a goddamn paramedic?
Right.
As if there's any chance. And then they keep saying, don't touch him.
Right. Yeah. Don't touch him. Call a paramedic.
Right. And then the old man says to Dick Jones, I'm very disappointed in you. And Dick Jones responds, I'm sure it's only a glitch.
Yeah. It's just a glitch. And then this is where Morton sees his opportunity. So the old man laments that OCP is going to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars from this setback. And then Morton's like, yeah, don't be so sure about that. I've got something perhaps that might interest you that's ready to go. So Morton says, we're ready to go with my RoboCop project. We've restructured the police department with prime candidates. I'm confident we can go to prototype within 90 days. Now, you can decode this when he says we've restructured the police department with prime candidates. That means OCP has placed people within the Metro West who would be good candidates to be cyborgs.
Right. So we get the idea now is that Murphy was transferred
deliberately
precisely because he had the right psychology and background training or whatever to get killed so that he could become RoboCop.
Right. And so when Morton says, I'm confident we can go to prototype within 90 days, that means he's sure one of these people is going to die.
Right.
And then I love how instead of saying, all right, like we got to notify the family of Kinney and take care of business, the old man responds, good, get your staff together. I'll expect a full presentation in 20 minutes.
Right. So nobody cares in this corporate world that this guy just got fucking annihilated right in front of them.
No.
Also, in this scene's important that we see that Morton's clearly pissing off Dick Jones because Jones is there too, and he's like, well, you can talk to me about this, right? So Jones thinks I'm above Morton. Any idea Morton has comes to me first.
Yeah.
Morton's breaking that chain of command, which is
going straight to the old man.
Yeah, Jones doesn't like this, as we'll see later.
And then this Johnson and Morton have a little discussion as they're leaving, and Morton says, fuck Jones, he fumbled the ball and I was there to pick it up.
Right.
And then Johnson says, yeah, too bad about Kinney, huh? Morton responds, that's life in the big city.
Right.
So apparently the idea of these kind of white collar corporate leaders getting annihilated by their own products is just whatever. That's just how it happens.
Right. And has he been, or does he warn him that Jones is a real killer in this one?
Yeah, Johnson gives him a warning, and then Johnson asks him, well, when do we start on your concept here, your project? And then Morton says, as soon as some schmuck volunteers, that is, as soon as another officer is dismembered.
Dies. And it then cuts right from there to the officer who will soon become RoboCop, right? So Murphy and Lewis are chasing Boddicker like almost immediately here, right?
Just first we have this scene where I believe they're on the roof of the Metro.
Or in the parking garage when they're talking about who drives.
Yeah, and here it shows Murphy is doing his patented spin move with his gun.
Right.
And we find out because Lewis says, nice moves, partner. And Murphy tells her that it's something that his son likes, and it comes from the TJ Laser TV show about a police officer. And then Murphy actually says to Lewis, role models can be very important to a boy. And so he's trying to get these moves down so his son will be proud of him.
Yeah, and he's basically like, yeah, I do it so my son will think I'm cool, right?
Right.
Yes. So kind of humanizing Murphy. You you quickly like Murphy, right? I mean, the movie basically makes you like him pretty quickly.
And then it also shows you this kind of indirect route from media to his son to him for him to
Truth.
learn and try to
Yes.
practice this
Yes.
little cool spin maneuver with his gun.
Right. And then he and Lewis had this little thing about who's driving, and Lewis drives first, right? I
No,
believe. Or no, does Murphy does,
Murphy
right?
does.
Yeah, that's right.
The amusing thing about this kind of going gag reel about them driving is as soon as the partner gets in the passenger side, the whoever's driving just slams it into drive and hits the
Right.
gas.
Right, right. So but at any rate, they're driving and they're pretty quickly on Boddicker's tail, right? On the Boddicker gang. And we see inside this van that they're driving. It looks more like an ice cream truck.
It
That
does.
Boddicker is looking at this money and he's pissed off because the money somehow got burnt,
It
right? So
got burnt when they blew off the door of the safe,
right.
and they
So he
apparently used too much
yeah,
explosives.
so he's pissed off and he's yelling at this guy. And then we get a quick like shootout scene here on the road that's not terribly interesting, except for Boddicker throws his own like worker. He's like, so this guy got shot once in the shootout, but he's not dead. And
Mm.
Boddicker asks him if he can fly, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they just throw him to illustrate obviously how sociopathic Boddicker is. Boddicker just throws him out and he lands on the windshield of Murphy's vehicle in pursuit, right?
Yeah, and then we go to this dilapidated industrial steel mill
Right,
that's
where
been abandoned.
presumably Boddicker's hideout with his people. Now, this is interesting because when they get there, they think about whether they should call backup, right?
No,
And Murphy,
they've been calling for backup
or
since
whether
the
they should
chase.
wait for it,
Yeah,
right?
and they're constantly told that backup is unavailable and it'll be 15 or 20 minutes.
Right. And then Murphy says to Lewis, you call it, right?
Right.
And then Lewis is the one who's like, let's go in. So the interesting thing about this is that Murphy is not at all depicted as some kind of like rogue, dirty Harry type cop. In fact, he seems to just be like a pretty normal, decent dude who follows the rules.
Yes.
Although
And
he does have some cool sayings, right?
yeah, he does the 80s one-liners.
Yes.
And it's Lewis makes the decision that they're going in. So we have two officers who have little pea shooter handguns against Boddicker's gang that has a lot of fully automatic large weapons.
Yes, they're obviously outgunned, but we see Lewis. I think is the black guy's name Joey Cox in the film.
Yeah, I believe
the
so.
black criminal who has a very garrulous personality and an interesting laugh. So he's taking a leak off of this kind of bridge. Lewis points her gun at him, says she's arresting him, and then he turns around and says, do you mind if I zip up first? And then we get a close-up of Lewis and she gives a peek.
Yes. And then he slaps her
off of it.
Yeah, off of the balcony onto the ground.
This is like Verhoeven's aesthetic, is that the reason she fails, if you will, is because she had to take a peek.
Yes, it's a kind of a bizarre scene, right?
Yeah, it is kind of weird. I'm actually, I don't particularly care for this one. I mean, it makes Lewis look like a buffoon.
It does, and especially because at this police department, she's used to males getting undressed and dressing all of the time.
Right. And also, if you're going to do this, you would make sure that your suspect is far enough away from you that he can't attack you immediately. I mean, it's just stupid cop behavior. In fact, both of them behave stupidly in this scene, right? It's just kind of inexplicable. Yes. So we then get Murphy and we hear these criminals actually having this talk about business, right? Which I think, again, is making this sort of comparison between these drug dealers and Omni Consumer Products. Like, it's all business.
Yeah, and one of them, they make one of the criminals says, we get money so we can buy cocaine and then sell it for even more money. And
Right.
he says the best way to steal money is free enterprise, right? So there
Right.
you have the obvious critique of Reaganism and capitalism.
Right. And then Murphy comes in with this guy's watching this TV show, which will be recurring through the movie of this guy who this guy with a mustache who says, I'd buy that for $1, which apparently is his funny punchline.
Right, and it's Emil, who's one of the criminals in the
Yes.
Boddicker gang, who's
Right.
watching this, and then
We get this awesome line from Murphy, dead or alive, you're coming with me.
and then Murphy's calls to Lewis,
Yes.
and she's not responding because she's
Right.
still hurt and on the ground.
Right.
So then Boddicker and the rest of his gang surround Murphy, right, with all of their heavy armor.
Stupid police work, because you know that these guys are out there, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense why you would do this, but they do. And then Boddicker and his gang come with their heavy weaponry, and again, Murphy has a handgun.
Right. And then Joe lets everybody know that he dispatched Lewis so that Murphy's alone. And Boddicker says, I bet that really pisses you off.
Right.
You probably don't think I'm a very nice guy, do you? And then Murphy gets in a great one-liner, buddy, I think you're slime.
Right. Right.
And then Boddicker basically, does the look like, I don't like cops. Cops don't like me. And you're going to die.
Right. And then he does this targeting sound with his shotgun, and then he blows Murphy's hand off.
And then, this is where he does say,
yes,
well, give this man a hand.
Right. And then so Murphy's hand has been blown off. And then Boddicker's basically like, you guys have fun with him. So Murphy stands up. And then this is like, if you're looking at the Jesus allegory, this is the crucifixion. And Verhoeven was insistent that this had to be as violent as possible, and it is very violent. So Murphy's getting crucified. He's screaming, like the first shot blows the rest of his arm off.
Yeah, so he completely loses his right arm.
Right, and then he just gets filled with all sorts. I mean, they're just shooting, I don't know, maybe like 50 shots into Murphy with shotguns, and then
Boddicker ends it by putting a slug right into his forehead.
Right, and this is another scene that is quite different in the theatrical cut, where they don't show you the actual hand getting blown off. They don't show the shot the same way, because actually this is a sort of pyrotechnic shot, like an impressive. They have an arc. The camera moves around behind Murphy's head, and then he gets shot through the head.
Yes.
You don't see that in the theatrical cut.
We see there's an aerial shot of his body where, the right arm is gone and there's just blood everywhere. And
yes.
It is a very, Christ-like shot and scene.
And then Lewis comes in and sees it. And then we cut to, this is where this is an excellent decision on Verhoeven for Verhoeven, who then moves to point of view from Murphy, basically. So the next, I don't know how long in the film, we're basically from Murphy's point of view as he's on this gurney in the ambulance, and then as he's becoming RoboCop, right? So we get
as he's the human Murphy is dying on the gurney, he has this kind of flashback of his family.
Yes. Right. So we see this, I think his wife's like waving in this sort of
and we see his son watching the TJ Laser show.
Right. And then we go through this process of having it from his point of view, and like he's being turned on, and then people are talking, and you kind of get the sense of how anxiety producing this would be if you're Murphy / RoboCop, because you're just getting turned on and off, and these people actually are even having like at one point a New Year's celebration around him.
Yeah.
And then they turn him on and off, and Bob Morton says, "You're going to be a bad motherfucker."
Right. But
to him.
also what's amusing in these scenes, so on one of them they turn RoboCop on, and you're seeing it from his perspective, and Morton and another individual are kind of debating what they should do with him, and Morton says, what? I thought we agreed on total body prosthesis. Lose the arm, okay? Because they tell him they were able to save the left arm.
Right.
And then Morton says, can he understand me? And this other person says, it doesn't matter. We're going to blank his memory anyway. Right. And then Morton insists that they lose the arm. And then he asks Johnson, right, well, what do you think about that? And then Johnson explains they can do whatever the fuck they want because
he signed this. Yeah.
Murphy signed a waiver when he transferred into Metro West, right? The kind of analogous to a non-disclosure agreement in the modern corporate world.
You can use my body however you want to once I'm dead.
Right.
And so
OCP owns me when that happens.
Right. Basically, again, just like pointing to the RoboCop as a product. No, yes. It's not a person. It's a product.
Yeah, we own him. We can do what we want with him.
Right. And then we get him again. He turns back on and boots up or whatever. And we get what are his prime directives, right? So the guy asks him his prime directives. We have 3 that we can see that are like uphold the law, serve the public good, whatever. And then we have one that's classified, which will of course become important. So prime directive 4 is classified.
Yeah. So then we have this scene where this kind of cliched scene where police officers are shooting at a target range, right?
Right. Well, actually, isn't RoboCop like? Don't they see him for? So he's like marching into the department. Everybody's like, "Who the fuck is?"
Yeah. Well, shit. And then you're at the target range, and we see like Lewis shooting. And this is a scene. I mean, you had a similar scene in the Dirty Harry series in the second film. You know, it's a pretty common trope for the police film.
Is it in Lethal Weapon where he shoots the smiley face?
Yes.
Yeah, which is clearly like mocking the cop who's such an awesome shot, and everybody else is like, whoa.
Right. So in this scene, you hear this really explosive firing that it sounds much louder than the other guns, and everybody starts looking, and it's RoboCop with this high caliber gun just blowing the targets to smithereens.
Now I have to assume that the people involved here get the satire that they have this handgun that could only hold maybe 10 bullets at most, and it's acting as though it's a machine gun.
Yeah.
Right. It's blowing out multiple blasts per trigger pull.
Yes.
And there's no sign that RoboCop has to reload this. So yeah, he just blows this thing to smithereens, right?
So then RoboCop walks out of the department.
Importantly, he twirls the gun, and Lewis sees him. RoboCop has this holster in his leg that comes out. He twirls the gun like Alex used to, and Lewis saw Alex do this once, and then he puts it up, and Lewis sees this. So we get the sense that Lewis knows that RoboCop is what used to be Alex Murphy, right?
Yes. So then RoboCop is walking out of the department. Sergeant Reed tosses keys into the air. RoboCop grabs them, says thank you, and then he's on his way to doing some badass crime patrol.
Right. And this is what this would be like the sort of stereotypical in a dumber movie. This would be what the movie was about right here, right? It's just RoboCop kicking ass. And so RoboCop goes out. He goes to the first thing he goes to is a store robbery, right?
Yeah. So first there's a robbery of a gas station that's apparently appears to be owned and ran by an older couple who they're watching TV, and they're watching
the same guy.
I'd buy that for $1.
Right. So this guy comes in, pulls out an Uzi, and then RoboCop comes in, and this guy starts shooting at RoboCop, and of course it's not doing anything. And then does RoboCop say anything to him before he punches him through a window or through the like freezer?
RoboCop says, "Drop the gun. You are under arrest."
Right. And it's now he kind of has a robotic type voice at this
very
point.
monotone.
Right. So the guy shoots at RoboCop. RoboCop punches him through a freezer window or one of those refrigeration windows, and then tells the owners, "Thank you for your cooperation. Good night." Right.
Yep.
And leaves. And then quickly from there, he drives up on these two guys who are sexually assaulting a woman.
Yeah.
And they have this shot here.
It's a brilliant shot.
Yeah, one thing is they usually have low angle shots on RoboCop,
Yeah.
so he just looks huge, and when you film from below, of course,
it's very imposing.
Right, and on this shot, they have him in this kind of alley or something, and you've got this backlight, and it's this shot so that his shadow is just enormous against this, like, kind of, I don't know, a brick wall or something.
Yeah, it's his shadow, a huge shadow on a brick wall behind the two male criminals who are assaulting this blonde woman. And it looks very much like the kind of shadows of 1950s sci-fi monsters that you would get in the films like Them, where it's like this gigantic tarantula shadow.
Right. Yeah, so it's making RoboCop look monstrous in some way. And so this guy he's like in front of this woman, and he's holding her. I think he has a knife up to her throat. And
they're assaulting her, mocking her, and
cutting her hair.
They're going to rape her, presumably.
Yes. Yeah, and then RoboCop showing us how awesome RoboCop is at aiming. Right, RoboCop shoots through her dress into his genitals, and of course, everybody loves a good genital shot in a film.
But it's such a great, like, masculine phallic type scene where there's a hole in the woman's skirt, right, near her genitalia, and then he literally had his penis shot.
Right. And so if you're going to do a cock shot in a film, make it funny. And this one is actually funny. And it actually provides information about how good RoboCop is at aiming, right? How his system works. And then he says to the other guy, "Your move, creep." And
the other thug wants nothing to do with him.
Right. And correctly assesses not a good idea.
And then it's interesting. So the woman's response is like genuinely poignant. Like she wants to have this actual moment with RoboCop.
Right.
And then RoboCop, just in this very monotone and very inappropriate way with the feeling of the moment, says, "Madam, you have suffered an emotional shock. I will notify a rape crisis center." And she gives kind of this, like what are you doing look, like disappointed that there's not this human contact. So it's playing on the fact that early on, RoboCop is more AI or robot than human.
Yeah, I think that's why these scenes are, I mean, they're fun, obviously. They're just action film fun, but they're also adding to the story in an important way, namely by making it clear that at this point, RoboCop is more computer programmed than Murphy.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he has
the humanity is deeply suppressed here.
He has this completely inappropriate, robotic response to a human crisis.
That's right. So we have then I guess what we would call like the kick-ass RoboCop part of the movie. We have these two crimes that have been stopped, and then we move to the third, right, where we have Ron Miller in this building, and he's a former
this was eerily relevant to our times, wasn't it?
Yes. So So Ron Miller is a former city councilman, and
who lost the election.
he
We get
lost
this.
the election, refuses to accept it,
Right.
and he's deeply despondent. He has the Mayor Gibson, as a hostage, and he has
Right.
what appears to be about a dozen other hostages, and he's killed at least one.
Right. And
And then he's having a little bit of a kind of debate or negotiation with the police
well, one
officers.
thing I wanted to say before the debate part is when RoboCop comes here, there's this other kind of macho cop who's basically like, what the fuck are you doing here? Because all of the media immediately gravitates to RoboCop.
Mhm.
And he shows up later as one of the, I think one of the like leaders of the cops when they're trying to kill RoboCop.
Yeah.
I wondered if there was more story to him that got cut,
Yeah,
because it seems as
possibly.
though he could be like this 80s macho asshole cop character that they might have had like 5 minutes with him, but
Right.
you know, he only shows up really 2 times, but one
Yeah,
of the times is here.
yeah, and so that's another important part of this scene is it's setting up the idea that RoboCop is now a celebrity,
Right, he's a
right? Like
hero now.
the media, is when he rolls up, they want to ask him a bunch of questions about what he's going to do, etc.
Right. And really, I mean, the thing here is it shows that he has thermovision because he ends up getting this guy by breaking through the wall behind him because he can see the body heat through the wall.
That's right. But it is uh, amusing when they are engaging in negotiation with Ron Miller.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, yes,
because
yeah, yeah.
he tells them he wants them to do a recount. He wants a bigger office. I want a new car, and I want the city to pay for it all. And they ask him, well, what kind of car do you want? And he says something with reclining leather seats that goes fast and gets shitty gas mileage.
Right.
And then the officer says, how about the 6,000 SUX, which
Right.
we'll see that vehicle runs
Yes,
throughout the
and
film.
obviously that acronym spells socks.
Sucks, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, he says, okay, sure. How about cruise control? Does it come with that? And then RoboCop breaks
Right.
through the wall and grabs him.
Right. So we have this vehicle that will also play throughout, which is, I think the commercial says it's an American tradition.
Yes.
So this is a vehicle that gets 8.1, I think, miles per gallon.
Yeah, yeah. That's this
Yeah.
extreme gas guzzler, and it's also, I mean, though that does play with another underlying theme of the movie, that this is Detroit. Detroit used
Yes.
to make great vehicles. You have the big three, GM, Chrysler,
Right.
and Ford, and now they're pumping out these shitty vehicles that awesome. It gets 8 miles per gallon.
Yes, that suck gas, and Americans love it because we love shit that wastes resources. And then I think we get another news broadcast where we're talking about
Right.
RoboCop. But the funny thing about this is they have satirical commercials, right? And they do this in the second one. It's the only good thing about the second one too. And in this one, they have a commercial. I think there's one for a replacement heart that's like whatever, not terribly good. But the one that they have for Nukem is hilarious. So this is apparently this game that you can play with your family, where I guess it's some sort of like battleship type game, except for with nuclear weapons. And in the commercial, I think the kid nukes everything or something, but they have the line at the end of it, nuke them, get them before they get you.
Yeah, it's acerbic satire with these
Right.
with these ads. Also, we have with these news anchors, we get the idea that the media is creating this celebrity with RoboCop, right?
Right.
They're like, who is he? What is he? Where does he come from?
Right.
It's OCP's newest soldier in crime management.
Right. So RoboCop's kind of becoming a celebrity, and the news funny. These commercials are funny. And
also, just one more thing to note about these news anchors. They make this comment today kids at Lee Iacocca Elementary School got to meet RoboCop in person.
Oh yeah.
The Lee Iacocca reference, for people who are not aware of Iacocca, he was this bombastic executive who is best known for the development of the Ford Mustang and the Ford Pinto, and then he ran Chrysler and was widely credited with reviving the company, mostly through the development of the minivan in the 1980s.
Yeah.
But he, is just kind of this over the top executive figure who was big in Detroit.
Fits in well with the sort of corporate satire and criticism here. So I think we go from that to the bathroom. We move to OCP, right? And we have this scene with Robert Morton where he goes into the bathroom.
Yeah, this is a great scene between this Bill guy who's some sort of high level executive, and he's talking to Bob Morton, and he congratulates Bob for making the vice president position. So we get the idea that because RoboCop has been successful, Morton's been promoted.
Right.
And then Bill asks him if he wants to play handball, that quintessential 80s corporate yuppie sport. And then Morton says, I'd love to, but I got a couple of models coming over to my place. And then Bill, quoting that guy who says, I'd buy that for $1, says that to Morton, right? So he's quipping this from the television.
Right.
And then
we'll see the models later too.
Yes. And then they both pull out these like elite gold credit card looking things at the same time. And then they look at each other and kind of just like smile and laugh.
Yeah.
And these are the cards that give them access to this like executive suite bathroom,
private bathroom.
OCP.
Yeah. So it kind of reminded me of this scene from American Psycho where they're comparing their business cards, because it's kind of like this stupid thing, like, oh wow, I have this slide card, but it's a sign of prestige, right? That they have access to this private bathroom. They go in there and we get this shot that shows us that somebody's in this stall that they can't see.
That's right.
Morton starts to rip Dick Jones, right?
Yes. And Morton says of Dick Jones, he's got a killer rep, but it's a smokescreen. He's lost his teeth. The guy's a pussy. And then Bill says, are we talking about the same Dick Jones? And then Morton says, he's old, we're young, and that's life. So we're the up and coming tigers. Then we hear the stall toilet flushes and the door opens. We don't see who was in it yet, but Bill, who was talking to Morton, acts very nervous now. He suddenly becomes nervous. And in fact, it's an amusing shot. So we look at him as he's done urinating, and he turns around and he pulls his zipper up, and we see that he's kind of peed his pants a little bit.
Yes.
Right? And he's kind of a sniveling little,
he's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
He's done. So we
everybody's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Right.
Because of course it was indeed Dick Jones. And this scene is, I mean, Cox acts this brilliantly, right? Just depicting this guy who has this very pleasant veneer, but is absolutely fucking ruthless. So he's talking to Morton about how pissed off he is, and I love this line because he's like, I had these military contracts with Ed 209 for 20 years. Who cares if it worked or not? And then he like grabs him by the face, right? And I forget exactly what he says, but
Dick Jones grabs him by the hair and says, "You just fucked with the wrong guy."
Yes.
And then Morton says, "You're out of your fucking mind." And Dick Jones responds, "You better pray that unholy monster of yours doesn't screw up."
Oh, right. So the other thing he tells him is basically like, the only thing that's keeping you safe is the old man. If the old man dies, I am going to fuck you.
Right, because Dick Jones explains the math to him that Jones is number 2 and Bob Morton is not. So also with the monster of yours doesn't screw up, we have this kind of interesting not just Jesus imagery, but also this kind of
Yeah, pretty
Frankenstein.
straightforward, Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that it's on between Dick Jones and Morton. We don't yet know exactly how ruthless Jones is, but we've just seen that he's pretty crazy.
Yes.
So then I think we cut from there to this Shell robbery, right? The gas station robbery, or is that
no, we
don't?
We cut back to the police department where RoboCop is having a dream.
Oh yeah. Did we just skip the gas station robbery then?
No, it follows this.
Oh, it follows. Okay, yeah. So RoboCop basically he has a dream which isn't supposed to happen, right?
That's right.
And he gets up and leaves. And in his dream, I guess he has memories of who shot him.
He's having these kind of flashbacks of him getting shot as Murphy. Right. But I think just as an example of the kind of over the top but amusing satire. So when RoboCop is dreaming, there are full-time workers who are supposed to monitor him. So there are these two workers who are supposed to be watching the television screens that show video of RoboCop. They're not, they're eating a bunch of fast food.
Right.
And they're talking about how the airport of Acapulco was blown up by rebels, right? Which we also saw previously on the news. So just this American.
And he's upset because he was going to go there.
Yeah, he was going to go there. So he's pissed. He's pissed off, and they're not paying attention.
Right.
So then RoboCop, breaks out of his chair and just leaves the department. And as he's walking out, he meets with Lewis.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then Lewis says something to him like, you really don't remember me, do you, Murphy? And it kind of jars his memory again. And then he says, I have to go somewhere. There's a crime being committed.
Doesn't Lewis ask his name?
Yeah.
Because this is important because this comes up later, right? So he doesn't say what his name is, right? And then he just says he has to go.
And then, and also importantly, so we get this scene where Morton comes into the police department and he's talking to Lewis and Sergeant Reed, and he's pissed off that RoboCop's just had a dream, but they tell him, well, we could shut this down. And he's like, shut it down over a dream? Fuck that. But then he says to them, let me make it real clear for you. He doesn't have a name. He's got a program. He's a product. Is that clear?
Right. So again, sort of driving home the point here that to OCP, and especially to Bob Morton in this wing of OCP, RoboCop isn't a human. RoboCop is property. He's a product that they've created.
Private property, classified. The police department doesn't get that information because OCP owns it.
Right. And then the timing, as far as I could tell, I tried to figure out the time here because it goes from night to day to night, and the timing just doesn't make sense here. I don't know if they cut shit or what, because we go from that the gas station robbery now, right?
Yeah. Now we're at the
right.
night.
So I mean, basically here, the thing that's important about this is Emil's robbing this gas station and RoboCop comes. It's at night, and Emil looks at RoboCop for a little bit, and I think RoboCop says
dead or alive,
you're coming with me, which is of course the thing he said to him in the steel mill. And then he looks at him as what the fuck? And he's like, we killed you, man. Yep. Right. Said, and so
you're dead. We killed you.
Right. So this again jars RoboCop / Murphy's memory about that. And so he goes back to the police station, or to maybe to OCP, and he goes to scan. He looks to scan Emil and known associates.
Yeah, he goes to the police station, gets in the database,
right,
looks up this Emil figure, and then sees that he was associated with Boddicker,
right,
and then finds out that Boddicker is responsible for the murder of Alex Murphy.
Right. So he looks up Murphy and sees that it says deceased, and then he sees that
he
Boddicker was
finds
the one who killed Murphy, and he finds Murphy's address.
and Murphy's address, if you're interested, is 548 Primrose Lane in Detroit. So you can go visit that.
Right.
So he goes to his own house.
Yes.
And basically has that same memory of his son watching TJ Laser, his wife, and they're in their Halloween outfits and take a Polaroid picture.
Right. But this is important because I think, again, this is what separates this RoboCop iteration from a shitty action movie that you could see the studio pumping out here, is that they have this sort of poignant family life that Murphy had, that they don't play it too much,
No.
but clearly they put this in here, and they actually had to fight to preserve this, right? So the studio wanted to cut it. Like, what the fuck is this 3 minutes doing in there? But it's actually important for building an emotional backstory to Murphy, and the fact that we care about the dilemma of, is this robot Murphy, or is it just a robot? Is it just a computer program? And this, according to Verhoeven, was like kind of like his paradise or whatever, his family life, which looks very happy as far as we can tell from this.
Yes. So there is the existential dilemma of
Right.
Murphy's identity.
Right. And what's interesting with this movie, and I guess this is often the case with rich movies, is that you could see making this film again and focusing entirely on this dilemma and making it more of a drama or a surreal existential flick about, is he human or is he a robot? How does that play out? They don't do that here because there's a lot more social satire, etc. But you could.
Yeah, that's right. So after he has these memories, then he leaves his house and he goes to this club where he finds Leon, who is in the Boddicker gang, and
apparently the information is Leon goes clubbing at a certain time.
Yeah, find Leon at the club. So he goes there. He does find Leon, and he asks Leon where Boddicker is.
Right.
And then we cut to Morton, the corporate yuppie, doing blow with two hookers, and he has this hilarious line because these are these two airheaded, like coked out women, right? Just stereotypical, like druggy types who are brainless. And then Morton says, "Vice President, it just turns me on." And then he says, "God, you girls are so great. I love to be with intelligent women. Smart is so sexy."
Right. So he's hopped up on coke, and they're probably having these like pseudo intellectual conversations. You hear a knock on the door. Morton gets up to get it, and it's Boddicker.
Yes, and
so
then
now
Boddicker delivers the line.
Yes,
as he opens the door, Boddicker just says, "Bitches leave."
Right,
and then
so
the women go scamping out.
They leave, and then he shoots Morton in the legs a couple of times, and then puts in this CD that it plays Dick Jones. So Dick Jones is so vindictive that he hired Boddicker to kill Morton. But not only does he want to kill Morton, but also he has to send him one last message.
Yes.
And so he's like, he plays this and he's like, I guess right now you're probably on your knees begging for your life. And then he says, you went over my head. That really hurt. But hey, you think of it as a game. There are winners or losers. And then he says, I'm cashing you in. Or out, I guess.
I'm cashing you out, Bob.
Right.
And then
so Boddicker puts a hand grenade on the table, which is particularly torturous because Morton's legs aren't working so well. And then Boddicker leaves, and of course it blows up.
Yep, and that's the end of the emotionally salient end of Morton, who absolutely no one cares about.
The tragic tale of Morton's fall to Dick Jones.
That's right. And then from there, we're cutting to the scene where it's the Boddicker gang is in negotiation with Sal's drug gang over some big drug deal. It's just some stereotypical, these are druggies doing drug deals, and there's no like coherent logic to what they're talking about, really. Right?
Boddicker it displays that Boddicker is ruthless and ballsy, right? Basically. And he does that weird thing where he puts his fingers in the wine.
Yeah, he puts his fingers in the wine, and then he like smells his fingers, and then
Yes.
Sal immediately grabs the wine glass and drinks it.
Yeah, it's a kind of a weird scene. I'm not even exactly sure what that's about, but it does show that Boddicker is a badass, that he's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And so, but then RoboCop breaks in. So
Yes.
RoboCop, I don't know if he somehow got the address or figured out where they were, or maybe Leon told him, I guess. Right?
Yeah, it must be probably
right. So
Leon
anyway,
told him.
You see his targeting system like go through all of the people here. So what we get here is just like a traditional action shootout where RoboCop obliterates everybody except for the one guy shot by his own men, I guess.
Yeah, that's an amusing scene. So Sal, the drug lord, one of his bodyguards gets shot and is injured and like twirls around and accidentally shoots him like 5 times in the stomach.
Right. And then RoboCop grabs Boddicker and starts throwing him around. And then Boddicker's like screaming that there's somebody else and that he works for Dick Jones.
Yeah, he says he works for Dick Jones at OCP, and OCP owns the police.
Right. And then he says, like, you can't really hurt me. You're like a cop. And then we see like, I think the prime directives, and he's like, oh yeah, I am a cop.
Yeah.
So this also again is showing that the programming is taking over the human Murphy, because we get the sense that the human Murphy would fucking obliterate Boddicker, but that his police programming prevents him from doing that.
Right. And so you can see this trajectory throughout the film, right? Where initially it's like 95% robot, 5% human identity. And as we move through, he's becoming more human. Murphy is gaining his identity again, and here he's not fully human, but you can see that, and we'll see this especially in this next scene, that the human identity of Murphy is actually fighting with the OCP programming in this cyborg.
So he brings Boddicker to the police station, not much doing there, but then he goes to arrest.
No, that's not true, because he has the line, book him. And then hilariously, they ask RoboCop, what's the charge? This drug lord who's connected with 31 police deaths, what are we charging him with? And then Murphy says, he's a cop killer.
Yeah, fair enough. And now when Murphy says he's a cop killer, it's because he killed Murphy, of course.
That's right.
Yeah, so then he goes to arrest Dick Jones because Boddicker told him Dick Jones is his boss. So we see him go into Dick Jones's office, and we see Dick Jones totally insouciant about this robot, and it's well done as they do it, because if you don't know what's going to happen, you're like, why doesn't Dick Jones seem to care? Because Jones is like, well, what are the charges? And RoboCop says them, and then he says, those sound like, serious charges, better take me in, or whatever.
Yes. And then as RoboCop is attempting to arrest him, you can see like his program starts to shut down. And then Dick Jones explains to us what's going on. So we're in on the scene here, and he says, it's my little insurance policy called Directive 4. So this was the classified prime directive, and that is, if RoboCop attempts to arrest a senior officer of OCP, it automatically shuts him down.
Now, this is a good scene, but totally defies logic throughout it. So if you're Dick Jones and you can somehow sneak a directive in, why wouldn't it be, I think somebody said this somewhere, like, why wouldn't you make it so if I say a password, I control you or something? There's plenty of things you could do. And another thing that's just absolutely irrational, that there's no way you can explain, is Dick Jones says after RoboCop kind of shuts down, and then he brings in Ed 209 to kill RoboCop. He says to RoboCop, Robert Morton or Bob made a mistake, so I had to kill him. To RoboCop. Now, why is this stupid as shit? Well, I mean, it's stupid because why would you confess to a crime to this person? But it's stupid as shit because later, when Dick Jones is talking to Boddicker, he upbraids him because he says, "You idiot! Like this is a machine that can record what you're saying."
Right.
So he's like, he chastises Boddicker for saying he works for Dick Jones, but then he literally confesses to murder to RoboCop.
Yes. The dialogue here is like, again, it's mostly exposition, but Jones does tell him, what do you think? You're an ordinary police officer.
Right.
You're our product.
Right.
And
so,
we can't have our products turning against us.
Right. So again, emphasizing the OCP RoboCop.
But at this point now, there also is an important moment here where RoboCop is still fighting to not shut down, so Murphy is, and he actually gets his gun and he's like trying to point it at Dick Jones, and Jones says, you've got some fight in you or something along those lines.
Yes.
So we can see there that the kind of human element of RoboCop, namely Alex Murphy, is battling, like there's this internal psychological battle.
Right.
He doesn't quite win at this point, so he's still reined in by the programming from OCP.
Right.
And then he fights the Ed 209 in what can only be described as incredibly underwhelming as a robot battle.
Yeah, I mean, they just didn't have the money to do this. So, but there is a kind of slapstick scene we get. Ed 209 apparently can't walk downstairs because his feet are too big. And so we get this scene where RoboCop has rolled down the stairs. Ed 209 is at the top and he's kind of looking at the stairs, and then he puts his foot out a couple of times as if to say, fuck, I can't make this. And then he rolls down the stairs, and then he makes these very weird, like
screeching noises,
screeching sounds, which are kind of amusing. But yeah, I mean, the actual battle there isn't particularly compelling.
No, and then we cut to the news again on with our favorite news anchors. This is where we see for the first time the actual advertisement for the 6000 SUX, in American tradition, 8.2 MPGs. Also, the commercial is hilarious because for some reason it features a dinosaur.
Yes,
right. Just shit that Americans love.
Mascot, I guess.
Yeah, just this huge vehicle behind some skyline with a dinosaur running around that looks kind of like a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Right,
and then the this is hilarious with the news anchors because they note that the Star Wars system had some sort of malfunction.
Right,
and killed 113 people. And then this guy who's delivering this, Casey, he says, 113 people are known dead at this hour. Among them, 2 former United States presidents who retired in this area that was destroyed. Right. So they just say that as if it's not even really that big of a deal. And then they just cut to some completely like tonally disjointed story that's right.
Yes, and then we cut from this. So this is just like a genius putting this in here and the way they do it. And then we cut from the news, I think, to RoboCop now is in the, I guess he's sort of like in the parking garage when all of the police have come now. And they have orders to, some people are like, no, we can't fire on them. And the guy's like, we have orders to destroy it.
Yeah, so to be clear, when RoboCop was having his confrontation with Dick Jones called the police department. Right. They're surrounding OCP, and when RoboCop attempts to leave the building, they open fire on him.
They unload, and then Deus Ex Machina Lewis comes.
That's right.
Or Deus Ex Lewis comes to pick up RoboCop and save his life. So get him out of there. So he's been, ripped into by a lot of bullets at this point. Luckily, none have hit the vulnerable human flesh.
That's right.
And so Lewis takes RoboCop out to the steel mill where we get like more of the sort of human side of RoboCop.
Right,
again,
but first we have Boddicker confronting Dick Jones.
Right.
So Dick Jones asks to see Boddicker. They have this confrontation. Jones, as you noted, Jones chastises Boddicker for for selling him out, or giving RoboCop information about Jones and Boddicker's relation.
He says, quote, "He recorded every word you said."
Right, and it can be used as evidence.
Right.
Dick Jones did not take his own advice.
Right. Dick Jones did even worse by confessing to a murder to him. But
that's right. Now Boddicker then, so Dick Jones wants Boddicker to kill RoboCop. And then Boddicker says, "Well, listen, Chief, your company built that fucking thing. Now I got to deal with it. I don't have time for this bullshit." Okay, first of all, Boddicker would want to annihilate RoboCop regardless, right? You have this super cop that's fucking up your crime world, and now Boddicker's acting like, I don't really want to deal with that.
Yes.
Then Dick Jones entices him by saying, "But remember, construction on Delta City is going to begin in 2 months. That's 2 million workers living in trailers. That means drugs, gambling, prostitution, virgin territory for the man who knows how to open up the markets.
Right.
One man could control it all, Clarence." And then Boddicker's obviously in. Now, again, preposterous dialogue. Like, I'm sure a criminal mastermind such as Boddicker is aware of the opportunities with Delta City.
That's for the viewers. The viewer needs that. But then he does have this line where he basically says to Jones, like, "We're going to need some heavy shit. And then you got access to that or something." And Jones says, "We practically are the military."
Yeah. So again, this militarization of not just the police force, but of private companies.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And then we get the scenes with the huge ass guns that they get coming up. Does it go to that, or does it go to the steel mill at this point?
At first we find out that the police are now on strike. Some of them have walked out. Others are walking out at midnight.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So the strike's important because that's why everything's gone to even more shit.
Bedlam than it already was.
Right. Which, now this is an interesting part about this film, because I think all of the people involved, at least the major players, are leftists, right? And like clearly it's this sort of scorching satire of capitalism, of corporations, of privatization. But it has this very right-wing attitude about crime.
Yes.
Like, if there weren't police officers using force to save people, crime would just be absolutely out of control.
Right. And the more force, the better, because Super RoboCop, when he's on the streets, there is a chance that crime could end within 40 days, right? So it's got this screaming like throughout it. It's got this real right-wing vigilantism in it, with these left-wing anti-capitalist social messages.
Yeah, there's like, this is not a world that would be a utopia without violence and police officers, right?
Right. Well, one of the two writers, right, just I don't know if it was Miner or Newmeyer, but they described it as fascism. Fascism for liberals.
Yeah, and I think Miner said basically like, this is what would happen until we move on from capitalism. So I guess maybe the argument is you could have a crime-free world, but you would have to live in a post-capitalist society.
Yes.
Whatever the case, we get this at one of these. I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we have the human bonding where
we're at the steel mill, and RoboCop takes off his helmet, so we see like sort of Frankenstein's monster is revealed here. It's kind of a hideous looking face, and he even says, "You might not like what you see," to Lewis. Lewis gives him this mirror, so we get this distorted image in the mirror of Murphy looking at himself. And actually, I thought what was interesting is they have a scar where he was shot in the head.
Right.
I noticed this time. So they have that.
And I think keeping Murphy's face with this RoboCop figure is really important because it does give him an identity for the viewer.
Right.
Because it is freakish looking, but it looks like Peter Weller, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so he's not going to put his helmet with his visor back on for the remainder of the movie. So he,
again, reflecting the next step toward humanness.
Right. And he asks Lewis about his wife and I think his kids or whatever, what happened to them. Lewis tells him, and then he says, there's a weird line here because he says, "I can feel them, but I can't remember them." But we've been shown that he has memories of them. So it's not clear what this means.
No, it's not. It's I was somewhat flummoxed by that as well.
Right. I guess it's getting at that he has, I think the dialogue would have been better if it said, I have bits and pieces of memories of them, but I can't make a coherent whole out of it or something, because that, I think, is what he's saying.
Yeah, perhaps they were better just to go.
But this is, I mean, this is good in that we get more of the human robot conflict, and we get bonding between Lewis and RoboCop because Lewis helps him. Well, at one point though, Lewis tries to comfort him and he says, like, "Leave me alone."
Right.
So now we get the sense that he has emotions, he has feelings, right? He's dejected at this point. And then at another point here, Lewis helps him recalibrate his targeting system. And it's sort of a touching interaction between the two of them.
Yes. And then we cut back to old Detroit, and now we know that the police officers are on strike, so it's absolute bedlam. Again, even more than it was previous to this when 31 police officers were murdered. Here it's just criminals, complete rioting, criminals running rampant, stores being looted.
Yes.
And basically the point of this scene is, one, to show how quickly crime has taken over with the police on strike, but two, Boddicker's gang gets together and they use their new weapons. We see them on display. They have these
big fuck off guns that they must have got from Dick Jones, these sort of military guns that you can shoot and blow up cars and buildings, because this the Joey, I think Joe Cox or whatever, the black guy in the crew, he bought, or he didn't buy it, he stole a socks.
Yeah, he stole a 6,000 socks.
Right.
And then Boddicker, who also drives a 6,000 socks, blows up Joey's with this huge gun. And there's a nice shot because the gun has an extremely long barrel, and there's this shot of Joey with it. It's like from behind him, and he's holding it like on his stomach or kind of like rib cage area. So from behind it looks like it's very phallic.
Yeah, very clearly doing this satire of like machismo, guns equal phallic
sexual images, potency and masculinity.
Right, which is something that I think that scene where he's like, "Mind if I zip up?" There's this kind of connection there. So yeah, they have these big fuck off guns, and now they find out where RoboCop is. So they're like, "We gotta round up the crew and we're gonna go kill RoboCop."
Yes. So they take off to the steel mill.
Right. Now, how do they know? How did that happen? I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I guess they have a tracker.
They had been, OCP had been tracking RoboCop.
So they go to get RoboCop. RoboCop hears this, and I think he tells Lewis to leave, right? But Lewis is like, "I'm your partner," or whatever.
That's right. So then RoboCop or Murphy comes out onto this balcony when the Boddicker gang is there, and they have a shootout begins. He shoots Joe, right?
Yes, RoboCop gives the line "looking for me," and then he shoots Joe like 20 times instead of shooting anybody else.
Right, he
he,
just
he
unloads into
annihilates
him.
Joe, and
And then
then
there's this great scene where Emil is driving the uh, ice cream truck looking vehicle, and he's trying
yes,
to run RoboCop over. RoboCop moves out of the way, and there's this toxic waste tank that
yes,
Emil runs into. So the truck runs into it, and then all of this toxic sludge flows out of the back of the truck, and we see Emil like rolling out and
right.
screaming like "Help me!" And it's very over the top, grotesque. He looks like the toxic Avenger, like his skin
Yes.
is melting off of his face.
Yeah, so there's some real like sort of body horror in this film, and something that like a Cronenberg,
And
David Cronenberg would appreciate and dive into, because
that's
the
right.
bodily integrity of Emil has been absolutely ruined at this point.
And interestingly, the FX guy who did that also was the same guy on John Carpenter's The Thing.
Ah, that makes sense. So
Right.
another bodily
Kind of
body
grotesque,
horror.
yeah, body
Right.
horror
So
type film.
Emil is like, he's stumbling along. It sounds as though he's having a very hard time breathing. He grabs onto Leon and says to help him. And Leon's like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
And
Leon's
runs
just
off.
utterly disgusted.
Right. And then Boddicker, Emil's stumbling across the street, and Boddicker runs him over and blows him to pieces.
Yeah, he just it looks like a water balloon just
Yes.
exploding. And
Yes.
so the 6,000 socks, right?
Yeah,
Get some
absolutely
action here.
wrecked Emil, whose head breaks off, and then
It- it-
Boddicker has to use the windshield wipers to clear to
right.
clear it. And then this is of course where the Jesus allegory part comes in, because they go to this sort of, I don't know, looks like a wrecked industrial part of this mill with some water, like a kind of almost pond that
Yeah.
they drive into, and he shoots Lewis, I don't know, 5 times or
Yeah.
something.
Boddicker shoots Lewis.
Right. And then he
She slides
says,
down into the water.
right. And then before he does his kill shot, he says, bye bye, baby. And he's going to kill her. And then you see RoboCop walking across the water,
Yeah.
which is a very purposeful shot to play on this Jesus theme. And at
Yes.
this point, we get the sense that RoboCop is becoming more Murphy, because when he's walking, Boddicker's like, whatever, throws his gun down, and he's like, fuck it, fine. But we get the sense that RoboCop's going to kill him now. And he even says, I'm not here to arrest you.
Yeah, yes. Murphy says, I'm not arresting you anymore. Now, so Boddicker's in this kind of pond with RoboCop, but we also see that Leon is climbing into this like magnet, like a what would you call those things? Like a industrialized like magnet or
With
steel.
it's like the crane.
Yeah, it's a crane that grabs like steel shrapnel. So
Right.
what Leon has the idea that instead of using his gun, his huge gun to obliterate RoboCop,
Right.
he will have this more indirect way of taking him out,
the
dropping
Rube Goldberg attack on
right. So he will
RoboCop.
drop a few tons of metal shrapnel onto RoboCop.
Right. And indeed he does, and it lands on RoboCop, and Boddicker sees this, like they're like cheering too, which I love. So like this guy's like cheering and Boddicker's cheering, and that's when Lewis blows the crane deck up.
Yeah. So
And then Boddicker comes with, he grabs this like looks almost like a spear of
yes.
metal,
and strikes it into RoboCop's
Right.
side.
Yes, he impales RoboCop with it, and RoboCop sort of like freaking out. And then he gives another terrible one-liner. He says, "Sayonara, RoboCop," and he looks like he's going to try to kill him. And then RoboCop deploys it's actually what he puts into computers. It looks like this spike.
Yeah.
And he cuts his jugular.
Yes.
Too much blood. A
yes.
very gruesome end for Boddicker.
Yeah, so Leon's he was taken out by Lewis, Boddicker
Yes.
taken out by RoboCop, and then we have, you know, RoboCop struggling. He needs to get the metal shrapnel off of him, and then there's this amusing line right at the end there where Lewis says, "Murphy, I'm a mess," and then RoboCop says, "They'll fix you. They fix everything."
I love that line. Right. So they're going to fix you. You might not like what happens there, but they will try to fix you up.
Right.
Right. So then
So that's
RoboCop,
the penultimate scene that
Yes.
leads to the final OCP boardroom scene.
right. So now we get
Which
this,
I have to say, just I consider this scene just such a brilliant fuck you to everybody, right? This
boardroom
last scene, because it's so amusingly like satirical, like the way,
Yes. Yeah. So right. So we get the sense now that Murphy is starting to triumph over the program
that's
in
right.
this scene, and that's, I think, the water walking is important there. So this is now pure resurrection. Murphy is back. He
Yeah.
goes to OCP and he breaks into this OCP board meeting.
Yes. And in this board meeting, Dick Jones thinks he's triumphant, right? He thinks he's
Yes.
defeated RoboCop. He says the police strike, actually, that's probably good for OCP. We can sell or put out and deploy more of these ED-209s,
Right.
and we expect immediate public support for it, right? So RoboCop comes in and says that Dick Jones is wanted for murder.
Right. And what's funny here, it's like the way that the guy plays the old man is so funny to me, because he's basically like he's relatively he's not particularly moved by this. He just says, those are some serious charges. What's
Yeah.
your evidence?
Right. And also Dick Jones, I like the line where he says, "This is absurd. That thing is a violent mechanical psychopath." Like
Right.
Dick Jones is the biggest maniacal psychopath in the entire film, right?
Yes. Right.
So
And then
RoboCop plugs in his like little USB spike type thing and
Right.
plays video of Dick Jones explaining why he needed to murder Bob Morton.
Right. So it's just
So he
this
plays it twice.
confession of, I had to kill Robert Morton because he made a mistake.
Yeah, and then RoboCop said, so we do think that Murphy is kind of triumphant, but he says to the room, "I can't do anything against anybody here because you
Right.
are all high executives at OCP."
Right. And so Dick Jones, we can see him freaking out. He grabs this silver plated gun that's in this boardroom for no apparent reason with fucking a clip of bullets.
Yeah, they still left it in there after
Right.
Kinney was annihilated.
Slaughtered. Yeah. So he grabs the old man and starts trying to negotiate about how he wants a plane and whatever. And then he's in front of this window with the old man, and then the old man yells, "Dick, Dick, you're fired."
Yes.
And then RoboCop says, "Thank you," because at that point, Dick Jones is no longer an employed by OCP, and therefore Prime Directive 4 no longer applies to him. RoboCop shoots him, I don't know, 5 times or something, and then he flies out the window.
Yes.
And some of
plummets
the
to his
worst
death.
special effects you will see in a good film ever, because we get a shot looking down, so a bird's eye shot of Dick Jones falling, and it's very clearly, not only is it not Dick Jones, it's not even human, it's some kind of puppet monstrosity,
right,
with arms that are completely out of proportion to the body.
Yes, it is not a good looking scene.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Whatever, you can forgive it because it's in such a great movie. It doesn't really matter. It's
now,
a
as
4-second fall,
as Dick Jones is dying, falling to his death, Johnson, the black board member of OCP, is just smiling his ass off. He looks absolutely giddy.
Yes, he looks as though, I like the way you I think we put it earlier, he's like the audience. So he's kind of just smiling, watching this happen.
Right.
And he eventually gives like the thumbs up, like this guy just got killed. Awesome.
Right. You the second in command at your company, you just found out that he's guilty of murdering one of the other high flying executive vice presidents.
Right.
But then, so RoboCop, he starts to walk out of this boardroom, and then the old man says to him, "Nice shooting, son. What's your name?" And we all know, even if you
Yes.
haven't seen it, you know what's coming.
Right.
But it's great. So he just turns around and he says, "Murphy."
Right. And that's how it ends. So at this point, Murphy has fully, or at least we get the sense that he's regained his identity, obviously, and he's using the name Murphy again.
Now, the thing that I love about the last scene, though, why it's just this big like middle finger, is what happens at the end. What's the kind of triumph here? Well, Murphy has just done the bidding of OCP to ensure that they can maintain control over the police department and build Delta City, right? And he did this all for the old man.
Yeah. So
And they're clearly aware of the kind of humor here, or the discordance between the message and what's actually happening.
yeah, I mean it's right. So it's like there are multiple layers there, because the most immediate layer is just like, cool, he's getting revenge on Dick Jones, right?
So psychologically, as the viewer, this is a very satisfying scene.
Correct.
You want Dick Jones to die. You view the old man as like this affable figure, right? And Johnson's kind of like whatever, he's been decent throughout the film. So it's really triumphant. But then when you think about the overall message of the film, you're like, wait a second, the old man is the head of this OCP corporation that has privatized and militarized the police department and is building a utopian city, and RoboCop is just doing his bidding.
Right. So there's no sense of any kind of change or triumph on that. I mean, we're still in this dystopian Detroit in which OCP is going to run things, and they're continuing the process of privatization and going to work on Delta City.
Right.
Which that will play out in the second RoboCop.
Right. But I just find that amusing, because I'm sure Verhoeven was like, ha ha ha, like that's, this is kind of funny, right?
Verhoeven has a kind of, he seems to take delight in fucking with the audience, right?
Right.
I mean, that's something that seems to appeal to him.
Yes, I think so. And so we have this film that's, it's, when you're watching it, it's kind of this trashy hyper violence and exploitation, but it's hiding this sardonic tone and this acerbic social commentary, which is hiding the absurdism and nihilism of the actual message of the film.
I mean, I would say hiding is an inappropriate term. I mean, it's not hiding the social satire. You're right, though.
It's somewhat psychologically masking it for the viewer, because you're like a viewer could just look at it as like it's this kind of trashy, fun exploitation film.
Yeah, there are multiple levels.
Right. Then you think about it a little bit and you're like, well, no, there's this real like acerbic social commentary. Then you think about the coherence of the social commentary and you're like, well, wait a second. Actually, it's just like a lot of absurdism and kind of nihilism there, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess my only point is like you would have to be a pretty dull-witted person to miss the social satire. I mean, it's pretty in your face. Now, but you're right. Each level is like a little bit different, and you can think about it and like, okay, well, what's the actual ultimate message here? Is like really one of nihilism, because nothing. I mean, something changes for RoboCop, but nothing actually changes in terms of the social context that they were satirizing, right?
Right. Nothing at all changes.
And that's the thing about I mean, just in terms of viewing.
And also, well, as we noted earlier as well, I mean, as the viewers, we're now cheering on the right-wing vigilante nature of the film, right? It's
Yes.
moved from the streets to RoboCop is committing, killing people in corporate boardrooms, and we're celebrating it as the viewer.
Well, so that's the interesting thing about RoboCop is that the dilemma that he has, is he Murphy or is he RoboCop? The way that we know that is he's more Murphy when he's going to kill instead of just arrest, right?
Right.
And so
right.
when he's walking on the water and coming at Boddicker, and we realize he's not going to arrest him, he's going to kill him, and Boddicker starts to realize it. We're cheering for that because that's what means he's Murphy. Although it's kind of weird because you don't really get the sense that Murphy was that kind of a vigilante type person prior to this.
That's right. But it does play on these expectations and the psychology that of human nature, that we have such a craving for this redemptive violence and this revenge.
And yes, it does. And Verhoeven, who wrote a book actually on his sort of version of Jesus from the Gospels that stripped it of the supernatural and, made a kind of violent political radical out of Jesus, right? That was kind of his reading.
Right.
He points out that he really emphasizes the more violent part of Jesus's message and points to, for example, grab a sword if you want to come with me. So clearly Verhoeven sees that political violence and the human desire for redemptive violence. I think he kind of approves of that, or at least he sees it as a part of the Jesus story.
Yeah, I mean, he does say, look, that's Jesus, and if you made an American Jesus,
right,
you're going to have a lot of guns and weapons.
Right, and the point at which he's walking on water is the very point at which he's now going to become violent instead of obey the code, the programming that he's been given. So that is interesting, and I mean, Verhoeven's clearly sort of conscious of that.
Yeah. So, and again, this is interesting because, as with Die Hard, it's an example of a lot of themes being put together and serendipitously it all works, right? And the writers, like Miner's probably more emphasizing his anti-capitalism,
right?
And Verhoeven's more interested in the existential dilemma and
the sort of new American satire, American culture, because
right?
He's an outsider,
right. So, and that's one thing about the kind of satire in RoboCop. It's very black humor it's been described as anthropological, right? It's almost like Verhoeven is this outsider taking this really detached perspective on, well, if you were an anthropologist from like a different planet and you came to the United States and you got coked up, how would you view US culture?
Do you need to be coked up to do that?
Yeah, you'd go gonzo anthropology, right? Just do some coke and
right. I mean, I think the point with satire, of course, is generally what you do is you take something that's at 7 and you turn it up to 10 to draw attention to the absurdity of it at 7. Right. Yes. So it's like look at how absurd the news is, that it will give you these stories in 5 minutes that are incredibly profound, sad, tragic, and then it just moves on to some other story and it gives you absolutely no time to reflect. And Verhoeven just takes that and turns it up to 10, and he does that with a lot of these things. And yes, I agree. This is what I think separates an absolute cinematic genius from a just great filmmaker. And I think Verhoeven is not a cinematic genius. And here's what separates it. Cinematic genius is almost incapable of making a bad movie, right? Mm-hmm. So Paul Thomas Anderson, his worst movie is decent. Stanley Kubrick, his worst movie is decent. you can, I don't know, like John Ford, it's a little harder when you were putting them out like very quickly or whatever. But with these like real auteurs, a lot of them, you're just making brilliant films no matter what. And even your bad film is interesting, and it's interesting to look at. Whereas
Right.
somebody like a McTiernan, whom we discussed last time with Die Hard, or Verhoeven, who I think is a better filmmaker, but still can make shitty films. And so it really does require all of these things to come together for his sensibility to work with a script, to work with the actors, and it all works together. And then you can get a real masterpiece.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I don't think Verhoeven is as talented as PTA or
Definitely.
right.
Yeah. And he just doesn't have the sort of visual flair or obsessions that those directors
And
have.
I just don't, he doesn't even really have the kind of coherent philosophy or message. That's why I say, like, at the end of the day, it's just, this is kind of a fucking blast of a film. It's fun. There are some themes that you could, I guess, like try to explore. But I think for Verhoeven, it's just, mostly it's just like, dude, this is hilarious. And, I'm making fun of myself. I'm making fun of you. I'm making fun of the actors and actresses, as we noted. Like, maybe he's deliberately doing that in some way. Maybe he's making fun of the writers. Like, maybe Miner was like, dude, like, I really care about this anti-capitalist critique. And Verhoeven's like, yeah, it's kind of funny, but I'm not going to pursue that and resolve that issue.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I do think like it's worth, you can think about how important is Verhoeven's sensibility to making this film, because you can compare it to, I think RoboCop 2 is a good comparison.
Yes.
And RoboCop 2 is what happens when a merely competent director, namely Irving Kershner, directs the RoboCop script. And you get this just, the violence is totally normal. The action is just ordinary. It's not over the top. It's not funny. It just kind of is a sad, boring action film with some social commentary that's also not that funny without the sort of sensibility that you had. Now, obviously, the script for the first one is better, but even just looking at the way it's directed, I think it does show Verhoeven's unique talent here.
One thing I would say, I maybe I'm reading too much into this, but Verhoeven is known for being like an anti-zealot, right? That's one of his, like, an important thing to him. Like, people, when you become a zealot, right, that leads to bad, like too much ideological dogma, etc. One thing that's interesting is the film has like this politically nihilistic message, because you can read whatever you want to into it, right? Like, you can read like right-wing vigilantism, left-wing anti-capitalism, some meditation on the effects of media violence. But I think there is this point that, like, don't try to read anything in, like, too comprehensively, or try to take out like one kind of dogmatic message from this film, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
no,
think Verhoeven's deliberate with that. Like, no, like, that's not what I'm about, right? That's the anti-zealotry is like, there isn't one dogmatic message to get from my film, right?
Yeah,
I'm against that.
I think he's right that there's not like a necessarily like a political message. It's really a mismatch of ideas and themes that, yeah, you could read it multiple ways. And that's what's interesting about the film. Is I was thinking you could remake this film in so many different ways, just depending on what you chose to emphasize. Hell, you could make it and just emphasize the Morton versus Dick Jones conflict, right? Like, even that could be what you put your focus on. Or you could focus on the existential dilemma with Murphy, or you could focus more on the capitalism and the privatization, or you could focus more on the mockery of American violence and in the news, etc. So
or on the relationships between the police officers and the police union, and, right, and the sergeant.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a lot there.
Right. There are like a lot of themes, and there are also a lot of subplots that are handled very deftly, where we see, like, it's on screen for like 5 to 10 minutes, and that's it.
Oh, yeah.
So in these various subplots that we're seeing throughout the film, it's relatively short. It's like an hour and 40 minutes or
Yeah.
something running time.
Yes.
So none of them are developed like comprehensively. We're just giving
Right.
like sprinkles of why do these officers want to go on strike? Is it because they need more protective equipment, better
Right.
pay? What's going on there? Right. So you could explore any of these in more detail, but they do come together pretty well to form what seems to be a coherent film.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think somebody made this comparison in the directing of Verhoeven and Kubrick, which I thought was interesting, which I do think explains like why I'm not a huge Verhoeven fan. I think I've seen 4 of his films. I counted on the IMDb. Although the 2016, what was it, Ellie? That's pretty
Yeah.
good. Starship Troopers, I think, is his second best film, at least that I've seen. Although you can kind of argue that the satire is too over the top. But the thing with Verhoeven is he's a visceral director for
Yes.
sure. He's
Yes.
not a visual director. And Kubrick is a very visual, cold, detached, making these shots perfect. Every element of the sort of scenery is very carefully planned, right? And
That would be the criticism of Kubrick, is that he's
yes,
too icy
that
cold.
would be the criticism, but I find that appealing. I like that, and I like
Well,
that aesthetic sensibility.
but
And I think RoboCop, my major criticism of it to the I mean, it's a great film, but it's not, it's not visually interesting. It's not visually accomplished. I mean, I'm not saying Verhoeven got what he was going for, this kind of, you know, documentary like realism, kind of quasi realism at least with it, but it's just that's the one component that you have in the aesthetic of cinema that's missing from the film, that you
well,
could imagine a slightly more visually interested director capturing.
I agree with that, and that's why I said Verhoeven's like the Gonzo coked up anthropologist, right? He's dissecting American culture in a very visceral way. It's not
Yes.
intellectually detached, whereas
Right.
Kubrick is dissecting the human condition with this like almost just like artificial intelligence, right? Running these dispassionate algorithms.
Well, I mean, he's dissecting it in a very detached way, right? It's
Yes,
just a completely different sensibility. And it's
right.
interesting to, I mean, thinking about the director's sensibility and how that leads to a finished product is a really good exercise when you're watching films, right? And to think about, I think the best way of thinking about it is to ask, what would this film look like if person X directed it? So you can ask, what would this film look like if just some ordinary director directed it? And you get basically RoboCop 2, which is watchable, but it's pretty depressing. And when you're done, you're like, whatever. You actually have the response that Siskel has to a lot of films where you're just like, nah, it's kind of mean spirited and
Yeah, gotta
violent.
watch a few puppy videos on
Yeah,
YouTube to cleanse the palate.
just fire up humans doing good things on YouTube to feel better about yourself and the world afterward. So
Right.
Verhoeven's clearly adding value here, a lot of value, in that he's bringing this visceral, satirical, gonzo flair to it. I just don't like the fact that the visuals are pretty uninteresting. I mean, there is the one shot where you get the shadow, of course. That's, it's a pretty good shot, but it's, in some ways it's a little over the top, ridiculous, and it's not, it's not a movie where you could take the frames and use them as photographs and be like, wow, that's an impressive photograph, the way you can with a Denis Villeneuve film or a Ridley Scott film or something, where you just be like, yeah, everything, like take Blade Runner.
Right.
So like, if it's fair to compare this to Blade Runner, because they're clearly in the same sort of cyberpunk genre. They're different films, of course, but Blade Runner is beautiful to look at. You could take so many of the scenes and just be like, yeah, this is an awesome photograph. Whereas RoboCop does not have that.
Yeah, I don't think that Verhoeven, even if he had the talent for that type of visual, producing these visual mise-en-scenes, he just doesn't have the discipline, right?
No, and
That's not what,
it's not what he cares
right?
about. But I think of
Yeah.
these things the way I think of like a novel. So I think like there are lots of things in a novel. One of the things that you could care about is just prose style. So a Kubrick or a Ridley Scott or a Villeneuve or a Paul Thomas Anderson, they're writing gorgeous prose.
Mhm.
Some would even say it's too beautiful, you know, too gaudy
Right.
or something. Uh, uh, um, why can I suddenly his Verhoeven is
Yes.
writing uh gonzo prose, just
Yeah, he's doing
just
like the Hunter S. Thompson.
flowing like conversational gonzo prose that isn't bad. It's not incompetently written, it's not ungrammatical, it's actually like pleasant, but it's just not that compelling. And that's what I think. In fact, I would even say, although I think Verhoeven's the more interesting director, McTiernan has more visual flair. So
Yeah,
Die Hard is a
yeah.
much more visually accomplished film than RoboCop is.
I agree with that, but I think the quirkiness of Verhoeven and his kind of offbeat sensibility and the decision to take this and turn it into kind of this schlocky pulp like exploitation film, at least surface level, that
Mhm.
was a great decision. And that's
Yeah,
something that none of the sequels have done, I
right,
think, to
right,
their detriment. I think the way to make
right.
the RoboCop sequel is to have some of that sensibility and that tone to it. I think
Yeah,
it just
well, it's to
works
do
with the
something. It's to make it art, because this is real art, right? The first RoboCop here, we're looking at, this is an interesting piece of art. All of the other RoboCops are studio productions designed to make money, which is fine, but they're not art. You wouldn't look at there's no point in analyzing them from that perspective because they're not art, and this is. And I agree that like the decisions he made makes they make the film interesting, and it is an interesting film, and it's very funny. And I think that a lot of that has to do with his sensibility, which is it's an interesting sensibility. Like I really need to. I'm gonna rewatch all of Showgirls
Mhm.
just to see. Like I think reading it, and maybe RoboCop even has a little bit of this Dadaism to it, which I think is an interesting, this sort of artistic nihilism that
Yeah,
Verhoeven
I think
has,
so. Like this
right?
deliberate, yeah, conscious
Anti-art.
nihilism.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
making anti-art in some sense, right?
And I think that about some of the messages in the film. Like Verhoeven's clearly aware of the fact that he's deliberately undercutting this particular reading of the film, right? I mean, he's not an idiot. I'm sure that he's smart enough to know that that's the case.
Yeah, so the thing I with these films that you wish you had careful documentation of the production process to know how much of this was in the original script,
Right.
how much did Verhoeven add, what was cut out, like was there this story with this macho cop, was there more to that? I'm guessing there was, but I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, and how much was the script? If you had the same, what you want to do, which is what you want to do in sports, right, with value over replacement, is you want to think about what does this director do. um how does this director, how, if you had 5 directors and you took that same script, exact same script, what
Right.
movie would you get? And what different 5 movies would you get, and how would they compare to each other? That's what you would love to do. That's the ultimate like goal from my perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It would be interesting to look at. It'd also be interesting to know like how consciously did Verhoeven make the old man Reagan, right?
Yes, yeah,
And so because if he clearly seems like this Reagan figure,
right.
and if that's true, then it's like you're at the end, you're like, yeah, Team Reagan, right? Get rid of the corrupt officials in the government, and where it's all about America, motherfucker.
Well, well, really, it's almost as if that theme, Verhoeven just said, fuck you, like that. I don't care about that theme now.
Yeah.
Or not only do I not care about it, I actually am actively going to flip you the bird, as you said. Like, that's not the point. Don't try to read it that way.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's just this deliberate
But you know what you
undermining
said?
of it.
You said something at the start of this, which I think is actually wrong, which you said Verhoeven is totally transparent about his purpose, but he's not.
No, you mean no? I said in interviews he's willing to give a lot of information about his thought process.
He does, but he, like many artists, does not unveil what he was doing, and that's why there's so much debate about what the fuck is Showgirls? Like, how do we make sense of this?
You're right. So his garrulousness and volubility hides the fact that he also is playing around with film critics and interviewers, right? He's keeping some information strategically to himself.
Right. And that's why it's sort of maddening to critics, because you're like, does he know he's making a shit film right here? Or does he know this is a shitty performance? And that's the point. And it's hard. Like, did he cast Denise Richards on purpose, for example, because she was a pretty bad actress and he knew he would get a bad performance from her naturally?
Right. And in the case of RoboCop, I think the fact that both of the script writers were actually dedicated to the social criticism, helped the film, right?
Yeah.
It helps the kind of more playful Dadaism of Verhoeven not getting out of hand.
Yeah, and it seems as though they were both, especially Neumer, however you say his name, was heavily involved in the production of the film, right? He was on set, he was working with them. So yeah, so you wonder, like, if you had just let Verhoeven go, what film would he have come up with out of this, right?
Right.
Because Starship Troopers is a very different beast, although there are some similar themes, right?
Yeah, and Starship Troopers, that is more directly an homage to the social satire of the kind of 1950s B-movie sci-fis.
Yes, but it's also interesting because there's there's this same sort of satire about violence, because there's a scene in which a cow gets cut up or whatever, and they actually blank it out on the news because they're like, they won't show animal violence, but human violence is totally fine,
right?
And there's like, Verhoeven just has this like this clearly is flummoxed and maybe even, humorously perplexed by our attitude toward violence, and I think the attitude towards sex, which he treats as almost indifferently in this film, right?
Yeah.
But then obviously he plays,
and actually in this film completely, like, there's no indication that any character, except for when Boddicker's
Morton has the prostitutes,
right, and Boddicker has the scene with the secretary at OCP. But
he makes
there's not really there's no like romantic love at all in the film. That's not portrayed.
Only the memories that Murphy has about his wife, right?
Yeah, that's it. Just the lost memories of...
Right, but Verhoeven doesn't really play that. I mean, you could see easily another director really honing in on the family stuff and doing a lot with that, and Verhoeven doesn't seem terribly interested in that. I mean, he's interested enough that he puts it in there, but he's not
terribly interested in anything.
Yeah,
right? That's the thing, is none of these themes are explored in any kind of depth. He's just not interested in doing that.
Or maybe maybe like his sort of view is like, he's restrained. He doesn't like go overboard with any of these
No,
themes. He puts them there.
He's giving those messages the same way that he's critiquing the media for doing it. He gives you this little like snippet of, here's RoboCop, he lost his family, this is interesting, here's 2 minutes, that's it, that's all I'm going to show you of it.
Right. And I think it's, yeah, and I was contemplating how I felt about that, because you could defend it and say, well, it's kind of interesting because it gives you this like superficial action film, but then actually there are a lot of these interesting themes in there, and that's cool because, you know, you can think it through for yourself, and it's more thoughtful than an average action film. Or you could say it's sort of a dereliction of duty not to explore some of those themes in more depth, and actually you're leaving a lot on the table that you otherwise could have.
But isn't that kind of Verhoeven's goal? Is
it is.
Like,
oh, right. I'm just saying, could you criticize his decision? Right. I'm not one of those critics who think, well, if he wanted to do it, he succeeded, so yay. I'm like, maybe he made a wrong decision there.
I would say until a talented team of writers and a director come out with a RoboCop that's done a little bit differently, that can compete with the original, it seems like he probably made a solid decision on that. I mean, it seems effective.
I agree, but I actually, I mean, to I guess to go to the summarizing stage where we rate it and then
let's rate and conclude it.
I was so impressed while I was watching it with how propulsive it was, that I think I overrated it a bit during that stage. I was like, wow, this is like very enjoyable to watch. It's very fast moving. It's funny. There's nothing extraneous in here. I think I went up to 9 or 9.5. I'm going back down to 8.5 upon consideration and reflection, which really is necessary for making a good judgment about a film. And the reason I'm going back down is because although it's a very good film, it's not, in my view, a classic anywhere near like Die Hard or Dirty Harry even, or Halloween, because it's visually not terribly interesting. And I care about the themes that aren't explored as much as they should be. So it ends up being a very funny satire, and the nihilism is kind of enjoyable, the over-the-top violence, the media skewering, but it leaves a lot, it leaves me wanting more.
So
I go 8.5.
I'm gonna go 9. I love the kind of pastiche, trashy nihilism of it. I love the fact that Verhoeven is aware of that he has created a media product that does the same thing that he's satirizing, right? That level of meta awareness. I just think that that's kind of fun. And because it's clearly true that the viewer goes away and they're thinking, this is just a badass action movie. RoboCop kicks ass. I'm not really going to think about all of the lives lost, the collateral damage, the fact that he sold his soul to OCP at the end, etc. Right. And I find that, I don't know, there's something very appealing to me about that level of mastery of the material, where you know exactly what you're doing, right? And you're putting it together in that way. And I think it works so well, as I said previously, precisely because Miner and Neumeier want to actually create this anti-capitalist social commentary. And Verhoeven's just like, yeah, kind of, maybe we can do a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, like, nah, like, fuck off. It's nihilism. This is just a fun film that's a kind of reflection of the effervescence of American culture, right?
Yeah, the effervescence of the 80s Wall Street culture, culture. I mean, I agree with everything you just said.
I kind of think you're trying to find a film that's not there.
Oh, I agree. I am.
And so,
but I think that's a perfectly fair response to a film.
But don't you think that it, like, having this huge blockbuster that's this really intelligent, nihilistic film that like is what it satirizes. There's some like brilliance in that achievement.
Yeah,
Like it's so much richer than like the first like 1984 Terminator, which was one of the early, influences, also released by Orion.
Yeah, because the 84 Terminator is really a more straightforward mood horror piece that you're supposed to feel that way, right? Whereas RoboCop does have there is a meta awareness to it, absolutely.
I guess I'm
comparing it. Yeah.
Let me just say, I'm giving it credit, I suppose, for being this studio blockbuster that's this quirky, idiosyncratic, and self-referential, because I just want to see more films like this that are at least interesting, and you don't see them from the studios.
Right, but giving a film an 8.5, I want to see more films like that too. So like, I'm never going to complain about watching a film that I would give an 8.5. I guess I'm comparing it to, I agree. I mean, Verhoeven did what he set out to accomplish, and that's great. And what he set out to accomplish is very entertaining, and there's much more to it than a stupid action film.
But there's not really.
Right? Well, there's not, and there is, right?
There is, and there is not. Right. And I guess Verhoeven's point is you can never transcend that. There's, it's just.
Well, that's kind of the anti-art component to his sensibility. That's what you get from Starship. That's what you get from Showgirls, even more extreme anti-art.
Yeah,
I'm comparing it though. I'm thinking of like, Blade Runner or something that is a complete masterpiece because it has everything going for it. It explores the themes more carefully, which I agree Verhoeven doesn't want to, and that's fine. But it's also visually appealing, whereas this is just kind of, is what run-of-the-mill visual. I think the editing's kind of run-of-the-mill. It's good. It's not great.
The editing and the like kind of whipping, the camera movement, all that. I think that goes into creating what, I mean, I guess you would say, Verhoeven, that's what he wanted to create, but we can still fault him for that.
Yeah, I just think it's his sensibility is limited.
Yeah,
my point is like ultimately that sensibility, like for example, Eli Roth has a certain sensibility and he makes films because of that sensibility.
Yes. Agreed.
And I think he accomplishes what he wants to, but I don't like what he wants to accomplish.
Well, I think more of my criticism of Verhoeven would be that when you do a film like RoboCop and you've established this sensibility and this this nature of self-reflection, meta-awareness, nihilism, you should grow after that, but he never does. Because,
well, in some sense though, Showgirls is the sort of natural progression, and I've seen it before, and then as I said, rewatched 30 minutes of it or something last night. Showgirls is sort of the progression of this because Showgirls is so meta. It's basically a fuck you to the studio for letting him make this thing. I mean, it's, I read a lot of commentary on it, and one of the things everybody said is like, how the fuck did this come out of a studio? right? I mean, it's like Verhoeven's playing a trick on these studio people.
Right. So the studio thinks they're going to get this very serious feminist exploration of this seedy underworld where women are objectified and exploited, and it's going to be like very dramatic. And
I guess
just like, nah, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do like this cinematic anti-art in which I make these scenes that are so bad they seem as though they were made by an incompetent film crew.
The acting is
absolutely ludicrous,
and there's an anti-message because the film is decidedly not feminist.
No, it's like it's both feminist and not feminist, right? It's both. I mean, I guess that's RoboCop is. It's both a satire of what it is,
right?
At the same time that it's promulgating like messages about misogyny in Hollywood or Vegas or whatever. It's
Right.
also promoting it.
So in the case of RoboCop, because the film is so entertaining, I wouldn't accuse it of being hollow. Whereas with Showgirls, because it's not that
Right.
entertaining, it's
Right.
somewhat hollow because it's like, well, what's the point of this, exercise here? Like,
Right.
it's not
So
even interesting.
right. So with RoboCop, it's actually enjoyable to watch. So you're like, okay, not only is it funny and the anti-message is sort of clever, but also it's entertaining. Whereas with Showgirls, it's like I remember I watched an actual Dada play in person that these people put on at a college, and I didn't know it was a Dada play. And it was actually like painful to watch, and you don't know how to respond to it, which is what they want though, because you're
Right.
sitting there and there are these people around a table and they had some dinner dialogue, and the dialogue was nonsensical, completely ridiculous. The acting was stilted over, some of it was over the top, some of it was stilted, and you get this like painful, I'm embarrassed for these people feeling, which is what you get during Showgirls when you watch Elizabeth Berkley.
Right.
You feel bad for her for acting that way, but that's what
Well, she's
Verhoeven.
trying to knock it out of the fucking park.
Right, I think so. It
I
doesn't
think so. I
appear
don't
that
think
she's in on the joke.
right.
Right.
That's the thing. I don't
And
think
then there's a question about, I mean, this is a different film, but the ethics of that, I think
Right.
with Denise Richards too, it's very dubious because you're exploiting actresses and purposely getting terrible performances from them and mocking them.
No, because you know that they want to hit it out of the park, and
Right.
they want to chew up scenery and
Right.
go for the Oscar. And you
Right.
also know that if you let them go for it, they're going to give really melodramatic, over the top performances.
Right, exactly. So they're not in on the joke that they're not doing the same movie you are.
Right, but
Because
as
they
I
don't
said, like,
understand it.
like, are the writers of RoboCop in on the joke? That like,
Yes, they are. They knew they were making I mean, I think maybe Verhoeven undermines their themes somewhat toward the end, or he's a little more nihilistic, but they got enough of what they wanted in there, and they
Right.
had the social satire. I think it's a lot different from you're an actress who signed, you're happy because this director hired you, and you don't realize that you're the joke.
right.
You're
Jesse
a part
from
of the joke.
You're Jesse from Saved by the Bell.
Right.
Your most famous acting was when you broke down after being addicted to caffeine pills. You
Right.
want to do something that will prove the haters wrong, and
Right.
in steps Verhoeven to exploit the shit out of you.
Yeah, it's basically the way I feel when you have like American Idol, and they at the first week or two they will show these people who are fucking terrible at singing, and some of them have real mental problems and think that they're good, and that
Right.
they're in some sense they're exploiting it because they don't, the people who are doing this, of course, don't realize that the reason they're on American Idol is
Because
because
they're
they're
terrible.
fucking awful.
Right.
Right. And I mean, there's an ethical conflict there. On the one hand, you could say, well, they're getting something out of it. So Berkeley made a lot of money and like whatever. On the other hand, there seems to be something mean-spirited about
Yeah.
allowing somebody to do that and taking advantage of their lack of self-awareness.
I think that's accurate. I will say that Berkeley was pretty decent in Any Given Sunday. A terrible movie, but she wasn't bad.
I think she's a mediocre actress who, with right direction, is not terrible. But if you let her go, she gives you what she gave in Showgirls, unless it's somehow shown to me that she was in on the joke. Then she gave a great performance.
Yeah, if she was in on the joke, that was an all-timer, man.
Right. But I don't think, and I've read interviews with her, and there's no indication that she knew that it was like kind of an anti-art performance.
Certainly the studio was unaware of it.
Yes. So anyway, but that's a different film, I guess. And my conclusion is very, very good film. I don't want people to think I'm denigrating it. I'm not. There aren't really any flaws in the film. My only objections to including it in the 9 category, which I consider 9 and above, like masterpiece level, is it's just a little bit empty for me, and it doesn't have the visual. It doesn't have great editing or great visuals that I need for something that is in that masterpiece category.
I think that it has great editing. I think the editing is great. It's very propulsive. It's cut.
It is that
Any fat is cut out of it.
Yeah.
If you watch that, you it goes by extremely quickly. It's very taut. And enough is left in so that you understand all of the characters and their main relations between each other. So there's not like any like important story left out.
I agree with that. I think there are like macro and micro editing. So macro editing is more about like the story and what you cut from the story, and micro is more what shot do you cut to or how do you cut to it. So Die Hard, the macro editing you might complain about because it is a little long and there's shit you could cut, but the micro editing's better. It's very, very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Where here the macro editing's very, very good, and maybe the micro's not that interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree with
I have to my computer is actually going to die.
Oh, okay. So we'll wrap up and we'll be back.
We don't know what film
next week,
do we?
Yes, it'll be a surprise what film we're doing.
Right.